it's really, it's the non-training time. And so that the cellular process is running its course to create functional proteins, right? So that's the hypertrophy adaptation. Like, we're not dealing with neural adaptations. We're just talking about the hypertrophy adaptation. So you go in and you do 1 set, 2 sets, 3 sets, or whatever. If we can create it so that there's basically almost no fatigue, that's long-lasting fatigue from those, then we're not, because the repair process and the hypertrophy process is the same cellular mechanism. So if we have a high degree of repair and regeneration that's going on, then it robs the hypertrophy cellular process of what it needs to do.
It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is Paul Carter again. He was out before. Check out the last episode. I should have the number, but I don't, but just search. It'll be easy to find. Paul's got over 30 years dedicated into strength and hypertrophy. Last time you were out, I put your primary focus was muscle physiology, biomechanics, and anatomy research. Would you say that's still that?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I'm just the big nerd as far as that stuff goes now, and, you know, distance myself for the most part from all the years we were just like picking stuff up and putting it down. Yeah. So that's pretty much my focus now.
So the questions I'm going to hit you with first are not training related, but I'm going to go with a cheat meal thing.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Because I'm probably like most people that are on social media in some ways, in that I'm not going to read a whole lot of the captions. I'll skim through them. Unless they're your captions and you're like trashing something, then that's kind of funny for me to read. But so I don't know why you're doing it. You know, is it a refeed? Is it a cheat meal? All I'm doing is flipping through the images and then thinking, is this just you? Or is this like other people?
Yeah.
Because it's a lot.
Yeah, no, it's just me. What's funny is I used to post them years ago, and people would question, like, they would say, you're not eating all that. Now I have a multitude of witnesses that are like, yeah, he actually does eat all that. So I find like the whole dieting stuff, I think, is pretty boring. Yeah, I think you have kind of a similar approach to dieting. You just don't find it that interesting, right?
Yeah.
I think we have that very much in common.
Yes.
So pretty much during the week, I eat the same stuff over and over and over again. And right now I'm in the middle of kind of a cut, and I have that kind of as a landmark. So my week, I'm pretty much like a machine. My week is just the same meals, same time each day, over and over again. And it helps to kind of have something to look forward to at the end of the week, and then to break up the monotony of just kind of eating the same foods over and over and over again. I try to change it a little bit now that I'm really trying to be serious about my fat loss phase, where I actually don't just go all out and eat like a straight a-hole, like on that Friday night. I actually try to make it a little bit more like a pure carb load kind of thing, where I'll have like spaghetti, and then low fat ground beef or turkey or something, and then figure out something that's like that's not super calorie dense for like the dessert or whatever. But then sometimes I just throw caution into the wind. Like I did the Hawaiian. This was amazing. This last week I did the Hawaiian king rolls. You know which ones I'm talking about, right? Yeah. So I did those into a French toast. It's the most amazing French toast I've ever made. I never thought about doing those before. And it was just those Hawaiian king sweet rolls. And I did my usual French toast. Well, not my usual. I actually used heavy whipping cream this time because I was going to go balls out.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh. I ate 24 of them.
24 of them.
Yeah, I did the whole thing. So it was, I couldn't even, once I took a bite of one, I was like, oh my gosh, like they were 10-10. I just started eating them. So I did that I'm in Nashville now, and they have a lot of really good burger places. So I'm kind of going through that thing, trying to find who has the best burgers. So, because burgers are such a good, right? Like it's such a good cheat. And then the burgers that I picked this particular time were unbelievable. So it was one of those really, really good ones. So I try to have a good time with that, because then I'll go into the weekend, and then I'll pull back and deplete a little bit over the weekend, and then go right back to my diet on Monday. I just find dieting such a boring thing to even talk about or approach or do. So it kind of keeps the little changes that I kind of have going on there kind of keeps me focused on what I'm doing with my diet. I remember, I always love your old articles about when you were actually trying to diet and how you kind of had the same thing. You're like, man, this dieting thing just sucks and it's stupid and I don't find it interesting. So you had to, it was John Berardi you were working with at the time, right? And had to find ways that you could approach a fat loss phase that worked for you.
Yeah.
I was on Jordan Side's podcast talking about this because people find that stuff for whatever reason so interesting. And I'm like, I can't do a flexible dieting plan. I think you're probably a little bit like this with me too, Dave, is if I'm not going to eat a cookie, well, I don't know what that is. Like if it's during the week, like somebody's like, oh, just forget, you can have a little piece of chocolate. You can have, I'm like, no, I'm going to have a whole vat of chocolate or I'm going to have 20 cookies. Exactly. Yeah. What is this? I'm going to fix, you know, my diet so I can have the Pop-Tart. I don't want the Pop-Tart. Just give me 4 boxes of Pop-Tarts. Yeah. So it's kind of an all or nothing thing. So I lead during the week, very strict, very on point. And that's very rewarding to me because it's like an accomplishment thing, right? And so then Friday rolls around. I'm like, what am I going to do for Friday? And from my own body, I can tell when my diet's kind of dialed in because by the time Friday rolls around, I'm really hungry and looking forward to that. And that's when I'll usually see a lot of I'll see very good results in terms of fat loss.
That's what I was going to ask is because when I would go through those dieting phases, those cheat meals could be very epic because I'm hungry as hell. Right. So,
wait, I remember this now with Justin Harris talking about how he had to make rules for your cheat meal.
Well, actually, I changed the way that he did cheat meals with every client moving forward. And it was because he had the one rule that he had implemented was it was always at the end of a high carb day. Yeah. Right. So, and that kind of would lower how much you really want to cheat. Because if you're already pulling in 800 grams or 1,000 grams of carbs and it's the last meal, you're kind of full, you know, to begin with. And where with the incident that you're speaking about, I think I went to Lone Star. Yes. Right? And that wasn't because I'm writing shit down all week long. And this goes back to even Berardi, right? Thing, I want fucking ho-hos, right? and then in my head, I'll think to myself, I haven't had ho-hos in like 15 years. Like, why am I craving that?
It's crazy the stuff that you start remembering. You're like, I want that this weekend. It'd be something you have literally not had in a decade.
That's why I wrote it. I would write it all down because it became this giant list. Then I go through there and be like, cinnamon Pop-Tarts suck. You know, why did I write that? Right. So I had this big list and then we went to Lone Star beforehand and nothing was on my list. So I ate that. You know, obviously everything you could eat there, it was stuffed. So then I just
Lone Star had the, and I get those chains mixed up. Did they have who has the honey rolls, honey spoon? Is that
it? Might be. I get them mixed up too.
Texas Roadhouse,
because there's Texas Roadhouse, there's Logan's, there's kind of like all the same thing. But yeah, of course, that was part of it. Yeah, you know, it was the one that didn't have the peanuts. I know that because
that's also Texas Roadhouse. I don't think they do that anymore.
Oh, okay, it could be because I remember that. I'm like, I don't want those. Right, because that's just I can have way better calories that I want to cheat on than a fucking peanut. Right?
Yeah, you don't.
But I already had
bought your appetite eating peanuts, man.
I already bought all the shit I wanted to eat, you know. So then after that, I had raisins and M&Ms. So I would just eat like one raisin or one M&M every 5 minutes, and in my brain, the meal never stopped. Yep, I kept eating. You know, so it went from like 7 p.m. to like 2 in the morning. And then when he asked me the next day, you know, how was your cheat meal? And I'm listing all this stuff out. And he's like, he's confused. Like, how is this possible that you ate this much? And then I laid it all out so that he put a time cap on it of 45 minutes or whatever it was from there. But
I remember I remember that article, such a good one. And it was something to the effect of, I think Justin initially had it so that it was like once you stood up initially, something, the meal was over, had to be over, like once you stood up from like the table or something. Yeah, yeah. And then for you, he had to actually change it so there was a time span.
There was a time, yeah.
I do the same thing because people ask me, well, how do you eat all that? And I don't know if this is how yours would feel, but initially when I would eat, it's a pretty weird thing. I don't think I've ever even said this out loud, but I will get full, and then like in 20 or 30 minutes, I'm hungry again. Did you have the same thing?
Oh, yeah.
It's a very weird thing. I don't know how to explain it, but like I'll eat a bunch of what I've got, and then I will feel satiated, But then within like half an hour, I'm hungry all over again. It's like it doesn't last. And then I'll finish everything. And then it's like I can eat more the second round. And so you can get, if you have a pretty ravenous appetite, you can get pretty wild on some of those meals. And that's why people are like, well, you don't eat all that. I'm like, you're right, dude. I'm just buying all this and for social media and then just throwing away food. But I've had enough people that have come out and done that with me. They're like, no, he's really eating all that. So, but I do try to, like I said, if I'm actually trying to be more strict with my fat loss phase, you can blow up pretty much your whole week. I mean, if you're like me and you, you can blow up a whole week of dieting.
Oh, easy.
And yeah, with a few hours. So I had some competitive eaters actually do a few of my cheat meals, and for a competitive eater, we're nothing.
Yes,
like they're on some kind of whole other level, right?
Yeah.
But he actually did say, he goes, it's not like difficult, but it's for a non-competitive eater pretty impressive. Some of the cheat meals that Paul does. So that was a pretty good compliment. So he said the best way I can explain it, like bodybuilding terms, is you're not a IFBB pro, but you'd be like a super heavyweight NPC guy.
Yes. When I was trying to, still competing and trying to gain weight, but having a hard time doing that, and this is prior to JM's advice of, oil on pizza.
The oil on pizza,
which, lasted like 3 weeks, by the way, but people have tried to replicate that for months and they're just fucking idiots and don't listen to what was actually stated in the first place. But as a side topic of that, I had a professional eater that I was asking, like, how can I eat more food? And he said, eat heads of lettuce. They'll eat heads of lettuce to stretch your stomach.
Yes.
Part of my problem would be if I had a meal kind of like what you're talking about, but you're not dieting and you're not hungry, is you get a heartbeat in your stomach, so I'd be in a quadruped just wanting to die, and my stomach would have this pulsating in it. And the way it was explained to me, and I don't follow research or anything with this, is if I would just start eating heads of lettuce on other days, I could stretch my stomach and then I'd be able to eat more food. So every other day I'd be walking around eating like a head of lettuce, to be able to stretch it all out. And I don't know if it really helped, because then I'm full from that.
That's what I heard too. So, because I wondered the same thing. I was like, how do these dudes eat this unbelievable quantity of food? Because there's the one guy, I don't know if you ever watched on YouTube, he'll do crazy like 30,000 calories or 50,000 calories. He's a little guy. Yeah. And then I was like, well, how are they doing this? And I read the same thing. They eat like these they'll eat as much lettuce to stretch their stomach out as possible. But then I often wonder, because I don't have the, people will always say something like, well, the next day you must be living on the toilet, but that really, I never have that. Like I never have, I don't know.
I never had that problem.
And I don't know why they bring that up. I'm like, I wouldn't, if that was the outcome I was having the next day, I wouldn't do it.
Exactly.
Right? They're always like, you must be in pain or you must be living on the toilet the next day. I'm like, no, you guys must have digestive problems, because I don't have any of that stuff. But I do wonder for those guys that can do 20 or 30,000 calories, like if they have anything, if there's any negative effects to that, because that's at a difference. Like you and I could probably do, pretty easily 10, 12,000 calories, maybe up to 15. I've done, counted one time, I put it on Instagram Live. I think I did 7,000 calories just randomly at a cheesecake factory.
Oh yeah, cheesecake alone.
Oh yeah, you can go to Cheesecake Factory. They have the calories listed right there, so you can plot that out.
Yeah.
So, and I was like 7,000 calories pretty easily. So I've done at least 14 or 15,000. And I don't have any problems. Like people will bring that up. I'm like, no, I don't have any problems. So I don't know if those guys do, but a lot of them are really, you probably noticed that too. They're not big guys. A lot of those competitive eaters.
Well, if they're eating lettuce all the time, they're not going to have the calorie. You know what I'm saying? Because you kind of tapped on it earlier that you can screw up a whole week. Oh, yeah. If you're really trying to pull fat off in that one meal. Well, if 3 meals of their week is heads of lettuce, which
there's
is
like no calories.
Like no calories, then
I wonder how many days they spend just eating heads of lettuce.
I don't know. I'm going to have to get one on the podcast, because there's a lot of shit about this I don't really know.
You should definitely get one of those competitive eater guys on here to talk about what they do, because that's literally like a training.
Oh, I know.
right?
Yeah.
Like the competitive eating, like the training they got through has got to be difficult.
Yeah, they got to peak for it.
Yeah.
And it's,
Can you imagine peaking for stretching your stomach?
there's so many questions going through my head right now. Like, how would you cycle PEDs for competitive eating? And what would the PEDs be?
I was going to say, no. I was going to be like, wait, what are the PEDs?
Exactly. What are the PEDs?
What would the PEDs be?
It's not Ozempic.
I would think it would be, of all things, something like alcohol. Like,
yeah.
Because you ever notice that too? Like if you get a drink or
THC.
so in you. Yeah. Well, yeah, because something that numbs down any pain. That would be your PED. Something that would numb any kind of pain. My God, how does this discussion?
Yeah, here we're playing it.
Wow, okay.
All right, so let's get into training. As we talked about a little bit before we started, where I wanted to jump off on are just basic training philosophies that when I speak to people about training, you know, the agreement is very high. 95% are going to agree on pretty much everything. That it might even be higher than that. It's probably 99% if you're looking at the full spectrum of everything that's involved in training, recovery, sleep, all those other type of things. But most of the conversations happen in the margins, you know, the 5%. And I get it. That's what people are looking for. That's what's rewarded on social media. That's all the other kind of stuff. And it comes to the expense of the basic stuff, which nobody really wants to talk about. I don't want to say I don't want to talk about. Everybody around the space for a few decades knows exactly what those things are. But the consumer of the education wants to breeze over all that and look at how much creatine do I need, or how many sets to failure should I actually do?
Oh Lord.
You know, and all those type of things where when we just peel it all back and like, here's the basic stuff, what would be those basic things for you? Very basic.
Very basic. I think that one of the things I've really come full circle with this past year, as deep as I've gotten into the physiology, biomechanics, fatigue, whatever's happening with stimulus, mechanical tension, everything, is that training heavy solves just about every problem. So if you're training heavy, you're going to reduce the amount of fatigue that you're going to have from session to session. For a long time, it was thought that heavy training caused more fatigue. It actually causes less fatigue. We can get into that if you want to. There's far less fatigue with heavy training, lower reps. With heavier training, you don't have to train to task failure, and you're going to reduce some fatigue mechanisms with that. And the other thing is people will bring up is the fact that, well, heavy training, quote unquote, kills my joints. But with heavier training, you actually get the adaptations at the tendon level that create a stiffer tendon and actually reduce the potential for injury. So there's kind of a lot of, I would say, almost misinformation that's kind of been repeated over the course of decades that keeps getting repeated, that people kind of believe as these are the truths, that actually either they're not the truths or they need context. Yeah. But I think for the most part, if guys will understand to start moving, especially talking in the hypertrophy spaces, if we're talking strength spaces, because I get asked about that a lot, then you have to get back to getting very specific about what are you trying to get strong in. So like if you're trying to improve your squat, bench, deadlift in powerlifting, then you need to squat, bench, deadlift. And you probably know this from just like you talked about with the creatine thing, or people focus, Jim used to call it Windler. Too many people trying to major in the minors. Yeah. But if you wanted to get a better squat, bench, and deadlift, you needed to squat, bench, deadlift a lot. And that was, people don't like that as the answer, right? They want the, tell me the best assistance work. How many years did you go through that?
Oh God, still. It's like, you know.
What's the best triceps exercise to improve a bench? You're like, dude, what's your bench?
Yeah.
So, or how often are you benching? How are you programming your benching? What are you doing with that? They always believe there's some mystical, magical exercise that they're missing out on that's going to add 100 pounds to their bench. And then, you know, you talked about, I remember this. You have so many good gyms, man. Gyms, GEMS, over the years. You talked about how you would train very hard and very intelligently to add 5 pounds to your bench in a year. You know, because once you get to that upper echelon, dude, you're training to get very small improvements in performance. Yes. So if you're training for strength, you're looking more at specific adaptations to whatever it is you're trying to do. So you have to get very limited into what all you're doing. Yes. Right? And then if you're looking at hypertrophy, we have a different approach, a little slightly different approach, where the main mechanism is going to be mechanical tension. So we have to really define like what's driving the adaptations that we're looking for, and is my approach really the most optimal towards getting those adaptations? And kind of like we were talking about preliminary, I don't think people like to accept the fact that on paper, what actually ends up is going to be the most productive is quite boring and simple looking.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't like that because they think there is a mystical, magical answer that's going to turn the guy that's been training for a few years and he's going to become the natural Ronnie Coleman. And I'm like, dude, if you were going to be that, 6 months into training, that was the case.
Yeah.
So from what the basics are is I've kind of helped other people even come full circle to, if you can start moving towards just heavier training, that almost solves all of your training problems. So like to start there is like, if we want to reduce fatigue as much as possible, we want to get the maximum amount of stimulus out of the training session to go towards increasing adaptations. And in order to do that, really, we just have to train heavy, and we have to progressively overload in our training.
Now, there would be a balance, and I'm interested to know where you would put this with training heavy and then movement quality.
Mm-hmm.
Because we'll get into a lot of other things later, but say if we're dealing with training the muscle in the stretch position or whatever it's going to be, and whatever the science kind of shows with that, I kind of see that, but then they're making an assumption that the movement quality is good to begin with.
I would say that's probably even my own false assumption, because in my head, if your execution quality is not good, well, then you do have to back off and get to a point where your execution movement is going to show that you're targeting the tissue that you're trying to grow, right?
Well, the balance there would be, in some of the big compound lists, maybe they're just not strong enough to be able to do it effectively. And that's that weird balance, because I fall on the side of everybody can do it correctly. They're just going to need to use less weight, and where the counter to that, let's say if it's a barbell row, which just for example's sake, that if you were to look at their form, it's like a 5 out of 10. And some would say, well, if they just train it hard and train it heavy and keep that movement quality the same as what it is, then the movement quality will get better as they get stronger.
So
we're kind of on the same page here, right?
I saw that where you were going. I was because we're training a pattern, and all that tends to happen is if we're progressively overloading, is that we just start progressively overloading that pattern.
Yes. And the other fault that can come is they'll never go heavier.
Yeah.
They'll become one of them super slow, super technical.
One of those super squeezy, stretchy guys.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's probably a time and place for that, but probably not with a dime on each side for a barbell row and a 220-pound dude.
Well, that's an interesting thing, though, is that one of the things that I actually really do love about the research is if somebody actually gets into the right research actually will explain exactly what you're talking about. So there's what we call like an internal focus, where we're focused on like mind muscle connection. And that's, as you said, that's fine to a point. But at some point you have to progressively overload that motion, right? You've got to add some load to the bar. Now, it doesn't mean that you get sloppy, but it means that if you're constantly focused on the stretchy, squeezy, whatever, you absolutely limit the amount of loading potential that you're going to have with an exercise. You know this, right?
Yes.
Like if you're always focused on the stretchy, squeezy, that kind of stuff. Learning a motion, that's fine. I do that in my groups with an acclimation. We kind of like get used to the movement and learn how to do it correctly, and we're going to add load for the weeks and weeks after that. If you take somebody and say, keep good execution, but hit a 5-rep max, they're not going to think about stretchy, squeezy. They're going to do the movement.
Yeah.
Now, I don't mean, again, let's keep this in the context of good training. They're going to do the movement, or should be doing the movement, still with good execution, but you're not thinking about the stretchy, squeezy. You're thinking about moving the load from A to B, and it used to be thought that was the wrong way to approach hypertrophy training, but it's not. Look, man, if you're doing a lat pull down, or you're doing a press even on a machine or a highly stable exercise or whatever, and you're doing a 4, 5, or 6 rep max, what do you think's moving the load? Like, it's the same muscles. When you climb higher up on that motor unit recruitment scale, you don't have that.
Summer's here and so is the heat. I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym, it kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link.
You don't have that same sensation of innervation that you have with those lower loads, but those muscles are doing the work. There's nothing else that can be doing the work. So there's that, I think you hit on that. There's that ground between, okay, am I able to progressively overload this motion? And so that way I can see that adaptations are occurring, because that's what progressive overload is. It's feedback that, either neural adaptations have occurred or muscular increases have happened. One of the two things. So if I need to go from where I'm learning this movement to where I'm overloading this movement.
Yes, well, I think that's definitely the route to go. And then all of a sudden now hypertrophy becomes basic,
yep.
And how it's being trained, where that has shifted over the last decade to where more people training for hypertrophy are seeing it in that light, to where, when I was coming up and when you were coming up, it's what body part are we training? And maybe you have a set range, maybe, you're going to just train it until you don't want to train anymore. The pump goes away or whatever the gauge you're actually using.
Proxy you're using.
And it stayed that way all the time. To where, what you very briefly explained, if there's a block of training in there that's going to acclimate or reacclimate, right? And that would be different time periods based upon the skill level of the athlete, right?
100%.
And now they have that movement locked back in. Now you push it.
You got to load it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then switch it out or whatever needs to happen during that next phase.
That becomes like this weird argument on social media where people will go on and on about mind muscle connection. I'm like, well, if you're doing a lateral raise, if you're doing abduction, what do you think's lifting your arm? Like, it can't be anything but your lateral deltoid with some, anterior deltoid. You get some secondary and tertiary movers in there, but what do you think's doing the motion? Like, I'm keeping within the realm of, we still have good execution going on with the movement, right? What do you think's doing the motion? Like, this idea that you need to feel it and move like a robot and super slow and all kind of, you're going to be very limited on your ceiling of hypertrophy adaptations that you're going to get if you're always working within this realm. I have to feel everything doing stuff. You know that, Dave, right? So there comes a point where you learn the motion, you standardize your range of motion, you standardize your execution, and then you've got to load it. You will never be able to get around that. If you are lifting 25-pound dumbbells doing this exercise, and then 2 years from now you're still lifting 25 pounds for however many reps you were doing, then you will look no different. Like, at some point you have to load that motion. So I think that's the area that people need to come to terms with, is like, I think there's just time and space for mind muscle connection or learning what emotion feels like. And then after you have that standardized really well, to move into, I'm going to start loading this motion. And that's pretty much what I said, like, that's the boring, this is how it really works thing that I think people often have a hard time getting their head around. That it's not more complicated. It's not drop sets, supersets, iso holds, everything's got to be at a super stretch position. It's not all that stuff. It's really pretty simple. Load something heavy with good execution, and then add reps or add load over time. And that's the magic bullet that I think people know exists, but they always think there's something deeper than that.
Yeah. And I kind of get it because I try not to separate myself too far from how I thought 30 years ago, you know, because we're all looking for the shiny things. Nobody wanted to progress slower. Right. Which is, you see what I'm saying? Well, it's funny though, because I mean, one of the biggest pieces of advice we'll all put out there is, you know, this takes time. You know, this is like a decade. It could take longer than that. Meanwhile, when we were younger, it's like, fuck that. You know, the same type of mindset.
When you're younger, it can never come fast enough.
Yes. But the difference would be we probably had two differences that I noticed is we had less shiny things to be attracted to. Right. So there's that. I mean, what you flip through a magazine or watch a VHS tape.
I think there was so much advantage to the time that we learned training compared to what kids have to deal with now, because I figured out when I was younger, you know, Dorian Yates was like my guy, right? And he used a very simplistic, what I think is like a simplistic approach, was using low to moderate volumes and progressively overloading your stuff. And I figured out early on, I was like, well, if I can take an 8 rep max to a 12 rep max and then double progression and then just increase the loading, bring it back down to 8, I'll grow. And it was really that simple, right? And like you said, we didn't really have a chance to get distracted by too many shiny things because we'd have to wait another month before we got another issue of a magazine.
Yes.
And they didn't always have shiny things in the next issue of the magazine.
Well, the other thing too is I think, at least in the bubble that I've always lived in, is if somebody was training for something, you know, meet, competition, fat loss, whatever, because not everybody competes, you know, so we'll put that out there. But they were all training for, this is what I want to accomplish here. They didn't lose focus of that. It's like they weren't kicking that can away or getting 6 weeks into it and, no, now I want to do this. You know,
there was an old term. Do you remember when the message boards, which were, you know, good and bad, but I think for the most part good, but there was a term we used to use on message boards and it was called a chronic routine changer. Yeah. You remember that? Where guys would start doing a routine, they would be 3-4 weeks into it and they see some other routine they thought was going to be better, and then they would switch over and start doing that routine. And the one thing I have to go back and remind people is if you're doing something and it's working, e.g., you're increasing reps with a load or you're able to increase load, you know, under all the same conditions, then your training is working. You don't want to change anything. It's funny, even as we get advanced, sometimes I think there's times where we may get a little more selfish in terms of wanting more. And I had this conversation with Wendler years ago, and he was feeling his best. He was like, man, I'm absolutely just crushing weights that I haven't been able to touch in a long time. And he told me, he's like, I'm going to make some changes. Jim's like, I'm going to make some changes. He wrote about this, I think, in the second edition of 531. And I was like, dude, you don't want to do that. Like, if everything's working right now, then just keep crushing with what's working. Yeah,
ride the wave.
Yeah, ride the wave. Fantastic. And he went and changed his training and got injured.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that happens, right?
Right.
And on the strength side, this can happen as well. They're actually ahead of plan, you know, and so then they'll change because when in reality, what they need to do is let it dial back a little bit. So they go into the meet or
with less fatigue present,
with less fatigue instead of, it's a good thing that you feel like you're ahead of plan.
So you're absolutely right. And I remember going through this with when I was doing competitive powerlifting and I'd be working with clients, right? And the training would be really dialed in. They're moving. We would use more of a kind of velocity-based approach, sub-maximal loading, making sure that we had really good speed with the you know, very similar to what the Russians did. Remember for years, what I want to say, Shiko would program somewhere between like 68 and 75% for the majority of a mesocycle with the main lifts, right? Like you worked on your speed and then you'd have a few weeks of loading. And they would get greedy and then they would do something like take like a max double or something. Like the whole reason why everything is moving like it is because your training's working. That's a really sore subject. I'm like, if your training is working the way I've designed it, don't change anything. Don't do anything to it. That's exactly the way that's supposed to work. And then a lot of people do not understand. They think a small thing doesn't matter. Like one of the things, this is how much a small thing can matter. One set to failure using high reps, 15 to 30 reps, can take as much as 2 days to recover from. Like we have that in the data. So if you were just like, I'm going to add in this whatever. Now you just actually, because that's going to reduce the amount of motor unit recruitment that you'll get in the next 2 days, your next 2 days are actually shot comparatively performance-wise to what they would have been if you had just not done that. So a lot of times people think that these are simplistic things they're putting in that will make no difference, but they can cause a significant difference in the performance outcomes in the following days or even weeks. Because
so an example of that could be a back down set of 15.
100%.
Yeah.
So like if you didn't have, let's say you were guys, well, I want to do a back off set, and the back off set's not programmed, then you do a back off set, and I do back off sets, but I still keep it heavy and I keep my reps low. But let's say you're like, I'm going to do a back down set of like 15 or 20 and I go to failure, and like that's not a big deal to add in. Well, like I said, the research is pretty clear on that. If we're taking sets to failure, there's going to be more fatigue. If we're doing high reps, there's going to be more fatigue. So now I'm going to actually take a couple of different metrics and combine them together. And I don't think it's a big deal when in fact the subsequent training days will be impacted by something that you think was kind of inconsequential.
Yeah, let's circle back real quick just to put more context behind what you're speaking about and what we'll talk about. And define mechanical tension.
Okay. Wow, that's my favorite because I think the majority of people on social media now do not know what mechanical tension is. They repeat it in a multitude of ways that are erroneous. Some people were mad because I did a stitch on Lane Norton this past week where, you know, Lane doesn't understand mechanical tension and it's in the appropriate manner. So mechanical tension, you have two types of mechanical tension. You have passive mechanical tension, which happens on eccentric phases of dynamic repetitions when you lower the weight. So you get passive tension. The magnitude of passive tension that you're going to get there is depending on a multitude of variables. You have active mechanical tension, which happens on the concentric when you have the cross bridging that's going on between actin and myosin, and basically you have that action going on kind of at that very tiny that level within in the muscle cell. So you have those two different types of mechanical tension. When we talk about mechanical tension within the growing muscle realm, what we're really talking about for the most part are kind of two factors. We're talking about,
well, before that, if we're talking about the aromatization, the phase between, I can never say that word, the amortization phase, what happens between the eccentric and the concentric.
Yeah.
Right. How does that play into that? And we're not stretch position wise, just from that repetition wise.
And what granularity do you mean?
From the well, if we're talking plyometric, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, that would be the easiest way to explain it.
Okay.
You know, you have that stop, right?
Yes.
Then there's that stretch reflex.
You're talking about like the stretch shortening cycle.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, so if we're lowering a weight like that, the passive tension comes from, okay, if we're lowering our weight, passive tension is usually coming from a couple of places. Passive tension will be coming from titin, which is a very large protein molecule that runs through the sarcomere. And we also have the slow detachment rates that are happening between actin and myosin. So you have that combination of those things kind of occurring. You do get some passive tension that occurs from the sarcolemma and some other stuff kind of in that, basically surrounding the fiber in the cell. But for the most part, what we're looking at when we talk about passive tension is from titin. And then we're talking about the detachment rates of actin and myosin. So as we lower a load, we're going to have, that's when you look on the force velocity relationship, right? On that eccentric side, it's flat. So you have this high degree of force that's happening regardless of load that's going on over there. But you have a low degree of activation because you can lower 20 or 30% more load than you can lift, right? So you have a low degree of activation. So the only fibers that are really active and an eccentric, when we're talking about loads that we're capable of lifting, are mostly fibers that are on that moderate to low end of the high threshold motor unit pool. So they're going to be like type 1 fibers.
Yeah.
They don't really, I know it gets said a lot, like you're going to grow a lot of muscle from using slow eccentrics. You're really not, because you don't have, a fiber has to be active to be mechanically loaded, right? And so if you're doing any load that you can lift at all, even for a 1 rep max, you're going to have a very low degree of activation comparatively on the lowering part than you'd have on the lifting part, right?
Yeah.
So you'd only have like type 1 fibers for the most part that get mechanically loaded on slow eccentrics. So the passive mechanical tension that comes from there will come from the detachment rates of actin-myosin and from Titan. And then as soon as you go back through, as you reverse it out, go through into the concentric.
Well, the reason I'm asking about that stretch shortening cycle is that could be a dead stop.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it could be a dead stop for time,
right?
Or it could just be continuously right back through.
Right.
So how do those variables impact what's going to happen then on the concentric?
On the concentric, it's basically just going to come back to, you would just get action potentials, right? That get sitting down. Hey, I'm about to do the concentric phase of the repetition, and then you get the myosin heads to start pulling on actin. So you would get some active tension from Titan because of the fact that it gets stretched out, and then when it shortens, it provides a little bit of active mechanical tension back. So as you're doing the concentric, the mechanical tension part is really just force.
Yeah.
So tension and force are interchangeable terms.
Yeah.
So when the sarcomeres, when you have the filaments that are doing basically muscular contraction, the actin and myosin, that's the active mechanical tension. So that's pretty much the two types of mechanical tension that you can have.
Well, will the mechanical tension change if it's, say, a dead stop deadlift, or if another example, just say a set of curls to where you stop and then start?
No, so you would
after a pause.
I understand. So you,
because you see what I'm saying? Because if I'm thinking more from, explosive strength, going from that dead top into that say if it's a box squat, sit, stop, boom, explode as fast as you can,
right?
Compared to a free squat, drop, come back up through.
Right.
There's that difference in there. So what I'm wondering, how does that impact that mechanical tension? Does it scale differently, I suppose, would be what I'm trying to ask. Does it innervate differently?
What is that? There's a term, rate of force development.
Yeah.
That's the one you're looking for. So the rate of force development. So there's an increase in rate of force development when you have kind of used the stretch shortening cycle where you have the myostatic reflex that's going on. So you have an increase of rate of force development. But from how we're driving the actual mechanical tension, I don't think that's going to ultimately play some major part in terms of how much total active tension or how much total passive tension that we're getting from that exercise.
All right. So now when we move into the active tension that you're speaking about, what are the factors at play there?
Right.
Because
so when people talk about hypertrophy training and they're talking about the mechanical tension that's driving muscle growth, really the two factors that we're concerned with is that, are we getting the largest fibers active within the set we're performing, and then do they get mechanically loaded? So you have a couple of principles that you have to look at. So effort drives motor unit recruitment. So people have trouble kind of putting these concepts together. So if I get out here, Dave, and I ask you to do a vertical jump, and you jump as high as you can, you have a very high degree of motor unit recruitment. You'll recruit all of the largest fibers in order to do that vertical jump. But because the velocity is very quick, there's a very fast, you don't have a slow degree of velocity. You need a slow degree of contraction velocity to have a high degree of force, right? So if I ask you to pick up a load that's a 5 rep max, you have to apply a high degree of effort. But the load's going to move slow no matter what. Like, no matter how hard. If I say, here, Dave, do this machine for 5 reps as a 5 rep max load, your first rep's going to be pretty slow, even if you're applying as much effort as you can. And so those are the two principles that we're looking at, is that the fibers that we want to get to grow or on the top end of that motor unit pool, they require a high degree of effort. So we need them active first to mechanically load them. But we also need an involuntary slowing of contraction speed, because that's when we're going to have the greatest amount of cross bridging that's going on between the actin and myosin that's creating that tension. So those are kind of the two factors when we look at mechanical tension that we have to say, how do we get mechanical tension on those largest fiber types? So we have to have a high degree of effort, so they're active, and then we have to have an involuntary slowing of contraction speed so that there's a high degree of force being produced. And it's really that simple. So some of the things that I hear about mechanical tension that are wrong is like, oh, there's more mechanical tension on eccentrics. No, there's passive tension on an eccentric. And if it's eccentric overloading, you would get passive mechanical tension on the larger type 2 fibers, but passive mechanical tension creates a completely different type of adaptation than you get with active mechanical tension. So one is going to be more longitudinal growth and one is going to be more radial growth. So they actually create different types of adaptations too, because adaptations are concentric or contraction based. So a concentric contraction gives us a different type of adaptation than an eccentric contraction. And that got mixed up over the years, because you remember the old research would say like, well, eccentrics, heavy, like eccentric overload training produces more hypertrophy. It didn't. Like once they kind of figured this out and were able to equate the loading correctly, they just saw, well, they actually produce similar degrees of hypertrophy, but they just produce different types. So even though it's kind of widely accepted now that mechanical tension is the primary driver behind all hypertrophy mechanisms, most people don't actually know what it is. Like different exercises don't cause it. You can't like get more of it by doing, like intensifiers or things like that. Like it's really just occurring kind of at that cellular level between the functional proteins. Mm-hmm. So it's really not a complicated thing, but people have trouble understanding those concepts.
So if effort predominantly is what you're speaking about,
yep, effort,
then slower concentric speeds would not be optimal.
That's a really I'm
intentionally slower.
No. The fact that you picked up on that immediately just fills my heart, because most people have trouble understanding that concept, and you picked it up right away. If you did on purposely slow concentric, it would be a low degree of effort, right?
Yeah.
And somebody tried to explain, and they're like, well, no, it's a high degree of effort. I'm like, no, it may feel hard, but if you're moving a weight very slowly on purpose, there's a very low degree of effort, right? Like if you pick a weight that you could curl very intentionally slowly for 10 reps, those first few repetitions there, it's a very low effort. So you have a low degree of motor unit recruitment. It's not going to be until there's enough accumulation of things that cause you to go, well, this is really hard, and I'd have to produce a high degree of effort to continue to go, right? That's when you can get into those higher ends of motor unit recruitment, and you can get those fibers active. So you have to get to a point somewhere within the set where you have to apply a high degree of effort, and then the bar is moving slowly, but not because you're intentionally moving it slowly. It's involuntarily moving slowly.
All right, where I think some people could mix this up. Trying to think of a movement that would be something that so if you do a machine pec fly, mm-hmm. for instance, if you're in that deep stretch position, then some people will hear that mechanical tension and then the effort, and then right from the very jump of that very deep stretch position, they're going to bang into it
right
as fast and as hard as they possibly can, to where on the other side of that is you start with, the pec contraction, and then once it starts moving, then ramp up the effort as hard as you possibly can.
Right.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. So they start in like that, almost like more in that slow, stretchy mind muscle connection thing. And then when they feel like it gets hard.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that? Because it's older, beat up people, I would tell them that you probably want to start it, with that chest contraction.
So there's always some people think that I'm like super black and white. I'm not. Everybody has different histories, injuries, tendinopathies.
Well, this is going to be movement specific as well.
I don't think you'd want to, and that comes back to kind of, remember, as we were talking about earlier, staying within the realm of, am I moving this with good execution, with good control, and that kind of thing? And I've found over time that I can, even if I'm doing like a pec deck or whatever, I can still be very controlled with a heavy load of 5 or 6 reps in that stretch position so that I'm not setting myself up for injury. I don't tell people when it's like go heavy, even if it's a stretch position movement, you still need control. And I think right? Like it doesn't mean that you're trying to do a pec deck fly like an Olympic lifter. You know, you still want control. You still want to, yes, you do want to make the muscles do the motion, but you still need to be able to overload the movement. So if it was something where also the resistance profile would matter too, right? Like if you were working on one of those pec decks where it was super heavy in the stretch position, probably want to maybe pay more attention to not trying to be explosive in that part.
Well, a better example would probably be a dumbbell fly, you know, so let's put more stability into the bottom end. And then
like, think about if you do a really heavy dumbbell fly, what kind of intuitively happens on the lowering phase? You lower kind of slowly, right? Like you're not trying to like bounce out of the bottom of a dumbbell fly.
Yeah.
So I think some of that does happen intuitively. You're like, oh, I'm going to do a dumbbell fly. Well, if you're doing dumbbell flies, I will say there are people, and now that my brain's kind of ruminating all of that, you see those videos where guys are doing, you ever see those dumbbell curl guys and they're doing like way more load. They tear their biceps because they're doing those really jerky, like heavy dumbbells. That's just ego lifting. And there's people like to use those. There can always be an exception to something. I mean, you know this, more people have blown out pecs from bench pressing and stuff like that, but some of that stuff just happens. But some of it's just ego lifting. It's like those leg press videos where somebody like snaps their legs in half. I'm like, well, just watch the video. And what the guys do. There's only 3 of them. There's only 3 or 4, and people have leg pressed forever. But I think that intuitively, if you're staying true to keeping good execution, some of those things work themselves out, I think, naturally. So if you're doing a dumbbell fly, I'm going to do a heavy dumbbell fly. I'm going to lower it under control. I'm going to use a proper range of motion so that I'm not trying to get too stretched, right? I'm not just trying to get more stretch for the sake of more stretch. So I'm working within a range of motion that works for my structure, that works for my history, for my injuries, for whatever it is that I'm dealing with. And then I use good execution. I can overload this in an appropriate manner. So I mean, I think the movement does matter. It also matters, like you said, with the resistance profile. If I'm using a dumbbell fly, it's going to be heaviest at the bottom, you know, because the load is furthest away from the shoulder at that point. So it's going to be heaviest at the bottom. If you're using something like a prime or one of those stride machines where you can change the resistance profile, your execution could change a little bit depending on how that resistance profile looks.
What are some of the other areas with this mechanical tension that you see people are not understanding?
I think the main things is that they think that, number one, there's something different happening with different rep ranges. It's still the same. Mechanistically, it's the same process. So whether you do a set of 6 reps or you do a set of 25 reps, it's still just mechanical tension. So it used to be thought that there was a multitude of different mechanisms that were causing muscle growth, like whether it was metabolic stress or whether it was all these different things, because they were trying to figure out why are we getting the exact same hypertrophy outcomes with a set of 6 reps as we are with 20 reps. And they were all tested, and we have a pretty good amount of data at this point now to where we're like, okay, you know, lactate, metabolic stress, none of that stuff actually causes muscle growth. And I mean, when I started beating that horse years ago, when I was looking at the data, I took a lot of shots online because that was thought forever. Okay, that's one of the drivers. But we have gone as far to do to inject people with lactate to no results. Like, it can be difficult because it's hard to isolate off some of those mechanisms from one another in training, because if you every repetition that you do, every contraction you do produces metabolites, right? So you'd have to be able to say, how do we get a metabolite accumulation without actually getting mechanical tension, and vice versa? How do we look at these things in isolation? And that can be very difficult to do. But we have enough data now to understand that it's really just mechanical tension. There's no like mechanical tension, and then if you're doing higher reps or whatever, there's like an additive hypertrophy effect coming from like metabolic stress or muscle damage or any of that. It's just mechanical tension. So at the end of the set, by the time you get to the end of the set, if you're doing a heavy set, there's the 2 things that we're talking about. You have a high degree of effort and you have an involuntary slowing of contraction speed. So that's mechanical tension. If you're doing a high rep set, what happens? By the time that you're getting those last 4 or 5 reps in a set of 15 or 16 or 17 reps, what is happening? You have a high degree of effort to finish the set, and you have an involuntary slowing of contraction speed. It's just mechanical tension in either of those. And some people have still tried to say that there's kind of other mechanisms going on, and one day we could find out there is. You know, and if there is, I'll be like, oh, look, it's another mechanism. But the other ones that have been postulated at times, they just haven't panned out. So right now it just looks like, and it should make sense because, Dave, if you look at all the data and you say, well, hypertrophy outcomes are pretty equal between all these various rep ranges, it should make sense there's only one mechanism, right? That there's not a multitude.
Yeah.
So if you had one driving it and another that was an additive, you would, one in some way, shape, or form, it can't just keep equaling out that it's the same over and over again. There's statistically insignificant differences. It's pretty much, it's really similar across a wide variety of rep ranges, right? So it only makes sense that there's kind of just one thing happening here. The other one is that heavier loads cause more mechanical tension. Heavier loads don't cause mechanical tension. It just exists on the force-velocity relationship. And I'll read that or hear that often, is that heavier loads cause more mechanical tension. They don't cause more. A heavier load immediately means you got to apply more effort, which means you get a higher degree of motor unit recruitment. But there's not more mechanical tension there. It's just mechanical tension that those active fibers are experiencing within that set. So that gets tossed around and is not correct. There's not more mechanical tension there. If you do the light load for 15 reps, you're going to get very similar degrees of mechanical tension as you get on a heavier load for 5 or 6 reps. So there's not more mechanical tension with heavier loading. It's just a higher degree of motor recruitment very early in the set.
So if we're just speaking hypertrophy and you're physically laying out different blocks, then would there be, granted, we're being very general here because I'm sure there's individualistic properties that are going to apply to different people. From what I'm hearing is they can simply just stay in that, 4 to 6 rep range heavy and change.
Generally, I've narrowed it down to about 4 to 8.
4 to 8,
yeah.
And then just change movements with each phase that they go through.
Yeah.
While the contemporary thought would be, here's a phase of 10s, here's a phase of 8s, here's phases of 6, where they both can work, right? But it may not even be necessary to do the 10s.
That was another one I took a lot of crap for a long time, was I'm like, good hypertrophy training doesn't need periodization. At some point you'll plateau out on a motion, or you'll plateau with it, and you're going to need to train that muscle using a different joint angle range of motion, different exercise, or a different component function. But for the most part, you can work within that 4 to 8 rep range, and you're going to get all the hypertrophy you're ever going to get. So the idea used to be to periodize your rep ranges for different adaptations. That doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
And that, I think, Dave, the problem is that people become very emotionally invested in concepts, and then when those concepts don't pan out over time, they almost take it as like a personal attack. And I'm just like, look, dude, it's just physiology.
Well, it could be. I mean, it could. I mean, to play devil's advocate, it could also be that somebody wants to keep that same movement in
totally
for 16 weeks, and there's no way that
there's
they're going to be able to.
Probably times you've gone through your training where you just love an exercise for 6 months, right?
Yeah, but then it becomes hard. Like, how do you keep
overloading it?
Exactly. Right. That becomes the trick.
Yep.
With that, to where that's where those rep ranges could fit that bill. But there's so many different things.
I think as far as that goes, I had kind of a PhD guy challenge me to that, and he's like, well, then he goes, if you look at the rep range continuum and you see the dots in the studies that represent like the subjects in the study, he goes, you'll see some people that are outliers. And he's like, well, why is that? I'm like, well, that's pretty easy, because they like doing that rep range more than they liked another rep range. Yeah. So if you like doing a set of 10 to 12, guess where you're going to put a lot of effort? If you hate doing sets of 5, guess where your effort is going to be low?
Yeah.
So it comes back to a very simple principle. If you have a high enjoyment for, say, doing 12 to 15 reps, you're going to apply a lot of effort. You're going to get higher degrees of motor unit recruitment. So that might be more productive for you during that time. But it doesn't mean there was something magical per se about changing a rep range where you're like, oh, well, I saw more progress when I cycled some different rep ranges. It could be that you just get tired of doing a specific rep range first. And you've probably had that too. There comes a point, I think, mentally, if anybody is training long enough or developed even like a modicum of decent strength, you do hit those times where going into the gym and, man, you just do not want to load the bar that heavy week after week after week, So I think that how that can work into something is maybe you want to keep doing a movement, but man, you're just like, it's daunting to load it that heavy week after week after week. And you're like, well, I'm going to do some sets of 10 to 12 for a while. And a lot of people will say, well, I got fantastic results off doing whatever. I'm like, I'm not saying you didn't. I'm just saying mechanistically, there's nothing that magically happened with doing that other than allowing yourself to change those rep ranges gave you kind of a spike in enthusiasm and motivation. And then you got back to training a little bit harder. So it really, you know, it's like we talked about, the concepts are so simple, but you have to kind of get granular and break them apart down into the root core of what they're really doing. And that is, if this caused me to train harder, well, I'm going to get more motor unit recruitment, and then I'm going to get back to having a greater degree of stimulus that's happening. So it's all the same mechanism, but you just have to break down and say, well, why did that happen? Because if we get back and we know here's the mechanisms that are consistently causing it, then there's no like magical spells that are happening in there that made this change. It's just that you got tired of doing sets of 6 and you started doing sets of 12, and that felt good. And then you were able to go hard again, and there's your results.
Yeah. So if we're to take that concept, which is now defined, and then bridge that into effective reps, you know, for the muscle hypertrophy, then how would you explain that? The whole effective rep.
So
principle, concept.
All right.
Yeah.
So the effective reps principle, essentially is those two principles. We have a high degree of motor unit recruitment, and then we're working on the force velocity relationship. So there's kind of like a couple of people that narrowed that down. So whenever we do a 5 rep max load, we have pretty much full motor unit recruitment from the first rep. 5 rep max load, can't get a 6 rep. You have to use pretty much, you're getting full motor unit recruitment from the first rep. And we've seen this in maximal voluntary isometric studies, where we've done isometrics. We see it in EMG, where they can see right around the last 4 or 5 reps of the set, you kind of tend to have the activation. The action potentials kind of tend to max out, and they don't like go up or go down. They seem to be right there in the last 4 or 5 reps. So it was kind of the looking at how much motor unit recruitment, where is it getting maxed out at? It's not like a max single still has the same amount of motor unit recruitment that a 5 rep max does. You're still getting the maximal amount of motor unit recruitment, but the perception of effort's a little different. So if you look at the effective reps model, which is pretty much undefeated. I know there's been some quote unquote detractors of that, but it consistently falls apart when you look at the data. So Chris Beardsley and Chris was kind of one of the guys that looked at this stimulating effective reps model and you know, really refined it. It got challenged by some people, and we looked at the meta-analysis on reps in reserve and hypertrophy. Because some people were saying effective reps would span out as far out as 8 reps away from failure. Now, without getting too sciencey and too nerdtastic into that discussion, Dave, does that even sound right to you? It doesn't, does it? So that was pretty irritating for me. I'm like, look, man, you don't have to be in the gym that long to know if you're I don't even know how you gauge 8 reps.
Well, I guess my only caveat to that would be if you take an advanced lifter who's been lifting for a long time and you use a movement like a leg press, you know, if you really get on their shit on the last set, you might be able to get them to do 8 more reps.
Because all of that's here, right? It's in the brain.
Yes,
right?
yes. You know, so, but that's like one example that's not going to happen across all movements by any means whatsoever.
Right. So,
but I could see that being a case where, yes, you could potentially be 8 reps shy of failure.
If you're doing really high reps,
but
you could be. But for the most part, if we're talking generalities without getting nerdtastic about the conversation, if I tell you, hey, Dave, you can still grow half the amount of muscle you're ever going to grow, so you mean it's like, no, right. That's just like a common sense. You don't even need to be like a nerdy lifter guy like me. You just, like, if you've been lifting and you know how you grow and what causes people to grow, you know you're not getting anything 8 reps out from failure. So the people that kind of challenged that were trying to insinuate that the data showed that as much as 8 reps out from failure would cause muscle growth. So we took apart every study that looked at reps in reserve and muscle growth. And there was one that showed people did get some hypertrophy 8 reps out from failure. It was sedentary elderly people who can do anything and see some improvement, right, in muscle growth. That was, I don't know if they didn't bother looking into it or if they were just being disingenuous because they they just want to take pot shots. But I'm like, that's it. And so when we spend it was like a full month. We went through every study, really breaking this down. And as it turns out, it looks to be on average about the last 5 or 6 reps. When you're training to task failure, those last 5 or 6 reps are the ones causing growth, like pretty consistently. And then when the training to failure, the first meta-analysis came out, they have a graph in there you can go look at. And when they did the red graph on the rep ranges, they start at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So they narrowed it down to, it looks like these 5 reps here are the ones that are doing all the stimulus, right? And for a noob, for a beginner guy, could be 6 reps. He gets 6 reps, stimulating reps out of a set to failure. It could be 6 because they just haven't activated those fibers and that mechanically loaded them, right? Like at all. Like, you know how it is being a noob, you just grow from anything. But it could narrow down a little bit as you get more advanced, where it could just be, and these are just basic kind of assumptions, because anytime you look, what's really going on between non-trained people and very well-trained people are the magnitude of things that are occurring, right? So a really well-trained lifter, maybe he's only getting 4 stimulating reps in a set failure, because he's kind of reaching an upper limit to how much those fibers can grow. So, but I don't think the range is pretty small, but I think in a set to failure, you can kind of say when there's no fatigue present, that you're probably able to get somewhere around 5 simulating reps out of that set. So we're literally talking walking into the gym. You don't have any amount of fatigue present, so you can climb up on the motor unit pool like as high as you can go. Take a set to failure, you're probably getting somewhere around 5 simulating reps out of it.
All right. So with the question that I've always had with that aspect, a couple things would be, why would powerlifters not have bigger legs, right? Because they operate in that 3 to 5 rep range all the time. It's the volume probably isn't enough stimulus for that growth, but that's one of the counters that I would
get asked that one a lot, and
that one I think is easy to answer. So go ahead and answer that one first, then I'll get to the next one.
So generally, as powerlifters, we're training pretty far away from failure on our big lifts. So if we're doing a triple, we're not taking 90% triples, except maybe a couple of weeks. Right before meet. So people will be like, well, why aren't powerlifters bigger? It's not the rep range, it's the mechanisms that are occurring. But if you and I, let's say, Dave, that we're like, hey, we're getting ready for a meet and we're 10 or 12 weeks out, well, how many weeks are we going to go until we actually get into what we consider heavier loading? It's going to be a while, right? So we spend a lot of time getting really efficient at the motions, at the movements, and building up to those loads. So we don't really spend as much time mechanically loading those fibers. We spend more time getting neural adaptations to that movement so that we're becoming far more efficient at doing it. So I got asked this a lot, and I'm like, because you guys are just looking at, it's a rep range. If the 4 to 8 rep range and powerlifters are always working in 3 to 5, then why aren't powerlifters bigger? I'm like, well, some of them are. I mean, Kurt Kowalski had.
No, some are, right?
Yeah, like Kurt had legs that rival any bodybuilder ever.
Yeah. To take what you just said, though, and kind of expand that out over an annual plan, you may be looking at 12 total weeks.
Not a lot, right?
Right. Out of, so first off, they're making a pretty broad leap to assume that you're going to put a lot of muscle mass on in 12 training weeks,
especially when you're far away from failure most of those 12 weeks.
And that's not what your primary goal is. So you're accidentally going to get IFBB quads
because you're going to throw in maybe for your assistance work, right? So most of your assistance work, I found as powerlifting, you really aren't training to failure very often. You're using some heavier loads, and maybe on some of your assistance stuff, I would do some pretty heavy, like elevated kind of stiff leg deadlifts, a little bit. But for the most part, when you do, my deadlift didn't actually move, Dave. You struggle with deadlifting too, right? My deadlift didn't move till I stopped going heavy, until I started moving with velocity. So I'm not training the deadlift heavy very much. My squat also had its best gains when I started using a compensatory acceleration approach and was doing multiple sets of stuff in like anywhere from the 65 to 70% range. Well, if I'm doing 5 sets of 5 with 65 to 70% and really working around velocity stuff, then again, I'm on that velocity side of the force velocity relationship. We don't get a lot of tension there. So this falls right in line with this. So if we're doing, let's say we're doing 5 sets of 5 on a squat, and what we're really working on is increasing velocity over so many weeks, then we're not working on the force side of the force-velocity relationship. So we're not getting a high degree of tension in those sets. Now, of course, we'll do some assistance work, but if you're a raw guy, what are you doing? Like, you know what I mean? You are kind of limited. Maybe you'll do a couple of leg extensions or leg curls or something here or there, but for the most part, you're focusing on your time in the gym and getting better at and more efficient at doing the lifts. So, you know, getting a better overhead press, despite the fact that people are like, you know, well, my overhead increased my bench, because I've heard that before, and I'm like, well, if overhead increasing your bench, I would have been like a 600-pound bencher, because I had a near 400-pound overhead press. And I'm like, that didn't cause my bench to go up. Like, benching helped my bench, but I wasn't a great bencher because I didn't have huge pecs, right? At the end of the day, you probably noticed that too. There's definitely some correlation, whatever. Guys that had really huge pecs were good benchers.
Yeah.
It's wild how that works out, right?
Sure.
Yeah, or had really big triceps or really great benchers. So weird. You know, Kurt was a great squatter. He had massive legs. So there is some, I think, carryover in that. Dan Green was incredibly jacked, right? And he did some bodybuilding style stuff in the off season. So I think you do see the Russians were never very jacked, but they trained more of that Chico style training where it was like sub-maximal loading, acceleration, velocity. And then they only had a few weeks out of the year, but they didn't look like bodybuilders. But a lot of the American powerlifters did, because they would do some more bodybuilding style training. So it fits perfectly within all of the other mechanisms. I think people just they hear 4 to 8 reps and like, well, powerlifters do 4 to 8 reps. I'm like, not the way a guy is trying to grow is doing 4 to 8 reps. It's a completely different approach. Plus, you don't want the existing fatigue when you're trying to maximize neural adaptations in terms of like motor patterns, because that can actually disrupt that and make them less efficient over time. So you want the least amount of fatigue while maximizing those neural adaptations and motor patterns in order to really get those to like maximal levels.
Yes. The second part of this would be I've seen people have less emphasis on all the other reps, you know, if it is for strength, right? They're not effective, so those other reps don't matter, to where those other reps are having those different adaptations that you're talking about, the neural adaptations, increasing work capacity, for instance. You know, a lot of lifters, now you can increase your work capacity to the point of a CrossFitter, which isn't going to help you as a powerlifter, right? So, right. So there's
definitely limited applications.
There's definitely limited applications, but on that strength powerlifting side, I've seen that pull back so far that work capacity will drop, then the recovery suffers and all that. And they're doing it because they'll say, you know, I don't want to do the reps that aren't effective. I'm like, effective for what? Right? Because there's different adaptations that are going to occur with other things. And I guess a pro bodybuilder could be an example of this. Is there may be some body parts they don't want to bring up.
Right.
Right. So then in that case,
or like in a case where there's something that just grows really easily on them, they don't want to continue to grow that. And then and that's going to be the case with everybody. I know this is wild to say, Dave. But genetics ultimately matter. Genetics ultimately matter, right, at the end of the day. So if somebody has naturally, you kind of know early on when you have a naturally good body part, something kind of responds much faster than everything else. And then you're going to, after 3 to 5 years, you're going to have something, you're like, well, this muscle is just really underdeveloped. I've not really seen that many cases where people truly kind of overcome that stuff. Like, and I feel like people get irritated at me about saying that. I'm like, dude, if you've been training smart and intelligently for 5 years and you have a weak muscle, that muscle's probably going to be weak forever. Do you not feel like that's
I do. I mean, it's
the degree
I do.
The degree at which you can bring it up is going to be far more limited.
Yes. I mean, you can load it with glycogen. I mean, there's temporary things, right? But for the most part, without synthol, right? You know, it's going to be very, for the majority of people you're speaking about, 100%. Yeah. You know, for outliers, maybe, but that's going to be more, you know, if you're dealing with that IFBB Pro, and the shoulders are a weak point. Maybe it's not a matter of building the shoulders, but it's a matter of making the things that are around the shoulders not as large
I
to
think
make
that
the
it
shoulders look
was
better.
it when Rami won his first Olympia, he actually got incredibly smaller comparatively to the previous years and had a much better looking overall physique. And I said for years that from a bodybuilding perspective, outside of Ronnie Coleman, who is always the exception even for bodybuilding, the bigger most guys got, the harder it became for them to really nail their conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
I just felt like that was an anecdotal thing I noticed. And then when Rami actually came in really great condition, he actually got way smaller and his physique looked way better.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it is just a matter of if I have something that's overpowering, but I have a weaker body part, and I'm actually after a more aesthetically looking physique, then I just don't train that muscle as much, or I reduce the amount of stimulus that I'm giving it within the training week.
Yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that there's probably a high probability that everybody listening to this is not that person.
Nobody's going to do that, Dave.
Yeah, nobody.
Nobody's going to do that.
Nobody that's listening to
everybody
this,
loves
right?
everybody loves their strong body part. Let's just yeah. Unless somebody's really trying to win an Olympia, that's the 1% of 1%, and it's like this needs to come down a little bit to accentuate something else. But I also think the average guy sometimes forgets, bro, you're not on the Olympia stage, right? Like, so I'm like, if you got weak arms, you're probably going to have weak arms, forever. I think it was back when I was powerlifting, and I remember there were some people who had a meltdown over this. I'm like, if you've been training for 10 years and you got a 315 bench, you're never going to bench 500. I felt like that was a pretty... And somebody be like, well, now I'm talking about, let's say you're even taking gear.
Well, yeah, no, yes, assuming that their technique and everything is good, I would agree.
Yeah. So like whatever is probably your weak point is going to be your weak point forever,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
That guy that's Peg and I were talking about on the drive-in. So like just those guys that have arms down to mid-shin level that, are pulling like 900 and they have like 185 pound benches, they're never going to bench 500. You know what I mean? Like there's always limitations genetically there, whether it's your structure, whether it's your ability to recruit fibers, whether it's your ability to train at a certain level, kind of hard. Some guys can train harder than others. There's always a genetic limitation in there that's going to, no matter what, that you're just not going to be able to effectively overcome to get to some level that you think you're going to get to. I get asked often, is there a natty genetic limit? It's such a weird question. It's like, of course there is. Like you can't, I don't even know where to go from with that question. If somebody asked you, Dave, is there a natty genetic limit? You're like, yes.
I would say that there's a synthetic genetic limit too. Right?
You mean like gear? Yes, of course there is, right? So you can only respond to a certain, like whatever response you're going to get out of whatever dose is still even genetically going to be limited to what the androgen receptors.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got limits basically built in at every level, whether it's your natty limit or whether it's how you respond to gear, whether it's how your nervous system responds in terms of motor unit recruitment, whether it's how many type 2 fibers you have in a certain muscle or division of a muscle. Sometimes I will get people ask me, well, like, if you know all this stuff, like, why don't you have like an elite level IFBB physique? I'm like, because I don't have the genetics for that. You could know every possible secret to maximizing muscle growth, but you are still inherently limited by those genetic factors, no matter what anyone says. Now, really smart, really efficient training that is based around the physiology and biomechanics and all the stuff that we're talking about can help you maximize what you have. But there's a limit to what that is. And there's a multitude of things right down the line that create what that maximization is. So,
well, to circle back to your bench example, to put a little more context into that, is with all the assumptions that we put out there being laid down, technique is good, all this is good. It's not like we can go fix something on their technique and add 40 pounds. There are people we can do that with.
Yeah.
But all those have been done. It's all done. What I find that a lot of lifters will do, and this, I'm sure it's going to carry over into strongman and other strength sports as well, is they will literally think that I have to train this harder. They're going to beat their head into the wall to try to get to the next meet to where they're still going to just bench 315, to where in my mind, they should find the least amount of work that they have to do to be able to have that 315 bench, take that other so it reduces the systemic fatigue to be able to apply more effort into the lifts that will grow for them. So maybe the bench doesn't go up 5 pounds, you know, but the squat goes up 30 or 40, because they reduced that training volume.
Isn't it called like Dance with the Girl That Brought You or whatever?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But you got to make absolutely sure that you're there. You know what I'm saying? So I can see a lot of people like, oh, my bench is 165. It's been there for 5 years, but your bench sucks. Your setup sucks. You know, you're not activating anything right. You're not there. There's still a lot of, you know, low hanging fruit.
That always comes back to kind of what you just hit on before. And that was, are people actually having honest conversations about what their goals are?
Yeah.
Because if your goal is to have, like, if you're a powerlifter, if your goal is to get the greatest total you got, and you're a 315 bencher and you're doing everything right, then you're probably going to go into that meet and bench somewhere around 320 or 330 or something, right? So what lift can you really help yourself with, right, to get the bigger total? If you're a bodybuilder, like, and you know, like we talked about, you have to kind of let something come down to create a more aesthetic, more streamlined looking physique, or if you just have to, you know, diet better, because dieting at the end of the day, guys at the pro level, if you're on gear, you're not going to lose any muscle, right? If you're taking a gram of tests a week, you know, you can pretty much just not eat and you're not going to lose any muscle. So that really comes back to a dietary discipline thing. So do you have the dietary discipline to show up absolutely peeled, or is that the problem that you've had in the past? Because anybody can get shredded, especially if you're on gear. And what I mean by that is like, gear doesn't burn fat. Anytime you see a dude online that's like shredded, people always think that it's the gear. I'm like, that's dietary adherence, bro.
When straw burns fat.
Yeah. Dude, you know how many guys that knew in powerlifting that were fat, that were on every drug?
Yeah, I know. It's just these funny things just keep popping up in my head.
I always say when straw burns fat. Like, explain how that happens.
Yeah, I'm in my cut mode, so I switched.
What's funny about that is I remember when John was alive, his favorite oral for filling out was actually Anadrol. You remember that, right? So John's like, Anadrol is awesome. He's like, the reason why guys think that they're bloated on Anadrol is because they eat like a-holes.
Yeah. He's
like, and then they take Anadrol, like, Anadrol bloats me. Like, no, your food is bloating you. Because he would take Anadrol and said, dude, I get so filled out and hard. So back to that point, if guys are having honest conversations about themselves, aware what it is that their goal really is. So if they're competing in pro bodybuilding, they can't ever get in shape, have an honest conversation about the fact that your dietary adherence really just sucks. Like, that's why you can't get peeled. It's not because of your drug cycle, and it's not because this. You don't do enough cardio, and you don't eat a few enough calories, right? Somewhere you're short-circuiting what you claim is your goal. Yeah. If your goal is like you want to, you know, you're just a guy that, you know, works down at Best Buy or whatever, but you're obsessed over growing your lateral triceps. Well, you know, I just always think those are funny, because I'm like, dude, if I feel like there's like not congruency between what guys obsess over and then what they're actually doing. So I think it causes angst, where they could kind of settle that angst if they would have better, honest conversations with themselves about, hey, I'm not a professional bodybuilder. It doesn't matter if I get lower lats. Right. You know what I mean? And so now they can just go in and focus on improving their overall physique, and they'll actually be much happier. But like, that's not the honest conversation they're having, because they're caught up. It's like you said, we didn't have all of these shiny distraction things growing up. We were just like, man, I need to get better at doing this exercise and get this strong. One of the things I used to do was, I thought, and this is it's not a true thought, but I think it was a good thought. If I could lift as much weight for reps as the guys I were seeing, that I would be, you know, like similar size. Now, that's not a true thing, but that's also not a bad thing to think about, because you're still just focused on, how do I progressively overload these motions? And that's going to get you pretty far. So I think that's the biggest thing, is like, they just don't have honest conversations with themselves. And like I said, if you're a 315 bencher, you're never going to bench 500. I've had so many people get mad at me and have emotional meltdowns over stuff like that. I'm like, it's just an honest conversation. I was never going to pull 800, right? Like I was ecstatic when I pulled 725, but I was like, I was never gonna be an 800 puller. I was pulling the bar up all the way into my crotch. Like there's very few guys, and Josh Bryant pulled 800, was not built for deadlifting. It's very difficult. People don't understand leverages, that genetic thing coming back into play.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you're having to pull the bar, you know, a mile from the floor, it's going to be very hard to pull a lot of load. So there's always that genetic limitation, you know, and I get guys and gals in my groups and why hasn't this happened? Why hasn't that happened? I'm like, I'm probably giving you the best programming on the face of the planet at this point. Number one, you have to be patient. And number two is that it could be that you simply are not going to grow that muscle very much. And that is sometimes an answer people don't like to hear.
How, with those cases though, how do you anchor with them effort, right? Because if they need that effort and that repetition, you know, what you may think, this is where the RPE stuff kind of begins to fall apart, even RIR to a certain degree, because it has to be anchored between who you're working with, right? So what you think is 2 reps in reserve may actually be what somebody else feels is 7.
Yeah.
You know, and until they learn that effort component of that. So how does that kind of play into the programming or even a dialogue that you're having with somebody?
Well, I used to be a, you know, task failure to like everything that you're doing kind of guy. And then over time, I began, as I really started to look at what's, like I talked about, what's going on with heavier loading, where we're already at maximum RDN recruitment with heavier loads. And what's kind of going on with that last rep is that it has exponentially more fatigue that it carries with it, if you just kind of knock that last rep off. Then I started implementing that in my own training, and I actually started seeing progressive overload happening at a exponentially faster rate than I was dealing with before. And then so I started putting that into my groups, and there's definitely some there's like an art to figuring out like what is this you're like if you've been training to failure all the time, trying to do a set to 1 RIR can feel really difficult at first.
Yeah, but at least you know what failure is, right?
I think that's an easy thing actually for most people, because they're like, I'm just going to go till I can't do another one. Right. And I think there's definitely some nobility in that. And I think you need to cultivate that in your training so that way you do know where task failure is. But I think if you can get to where you're doing heavier loading and you're just kind of lopping that most fatiguing rep off, you're probably going to see the greatest amount of progress, because you're just kind of eliminating this significant degree of fatigue that 1 rep is actually causing you more than the others. And then the other thing is the approach you're asking, like, well, how do you get these people? Is that because you still keep failure sets within the training program, right? Because I still think that you need failure sets in there for a couple of reasons. Number one, to make sure you're gauging your RIRs correctly, and then, but more or less using it as a tool rather than the driving mechanism behind the training itself. So you're using it, am I gauging my RIRs correctly, my RP correctly? And then is my progressive overload really occurring? Because you really hit on something really, really good a little bit ago. And you said, if people would kind of get back to being okay with progressing slower and not having to max out their performance every training session, they would actually progress much faster. It's the, what is it in the shooting is slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? And if people would look at progression as terms of, you know, this next 8 or 10 weeks in this mesocycle, or this next 6 months in this mesocycle, and instead of trying to see progressive overload every single session and they're constantly pushing up against like what they're capable of, they would knock off that fatigue that's existing because they're not always training to failure. And then they would realize at the end of like 3 months or 6 months, man, the stuff I used to max out with is like literally become one of my warm-ups now. But they're so impatient. Like I have literally had to explain to people, look, man, when you're a rank beginner, you should probably expect to see performance improvements session to session to session. You can expect that for maybe 6 months. And then as you start to get more trained, that rate of progression starts to slow down exponentially. I mean, the majority of the muscle mass that you're going to gain happens in the first year if you're training smart, intelligently hard. It's somewhere around, now we're talking about natties, right? Let's just stay within the natural realm of discussion. if you have somewhere around 45 pounds of natural muscle that you can gain, it literally it's like something like 28 to 30 something pounds of it can come within the first year. So you're going to spend the remainder of your life chasing around 10 pounds. Most of it comes within that first year. So, or I think it's like the first year and then the second year, pretty much first 2 years is where you're going to get like 90% of your gains, 95%. And then guys would be complaining, I haven't added a rep or load in 2 workouts. I'm like, that ain't shit.
Yeah.
That is nothing. If you've been training for 5 years, I don't think you can expect to progressively overload. Maybe every 3rd or 4th, 5th workout. And that could be a month, right? That could be a month. So I learned to stop sweating that stuff a long time ago. I'm like, if I really like a movement, gives me no problems, doesn't hurt me, feels good to my structures, highly stable, I can load it for a long time, I'm okay with taking that slow progressive approach where I'm adding, or getting a rep maybe every 3rd or 4th or 5th, even 5th workout, if I enjoy it, because I still think the enjoyment of training is massively important. Like, I feel like that still needs to exist, because if you just hate training a specific way, no matter what, you're just going to get really terrible results. So kind of understanding where you're at in your training status with what progressive overload should even look like, I feel like is often lost, because as you stated earlier, it can never come fast enough for most people. The rate of progression is always slower than what they want it to be. So then therefore they start to question, is this even the best way to train? Because I'm not adding a rep every single workout. I'm like, well, you've been training for 10 years. You really expect to add a rep every single workout? I mean, remember the old cycles in powerlifting where a guy would be like, I'm going to add 10 pounds to my bench every couple months. So therefore by the end of the year, it's like 50 or 60 pounds. I'm like, that's not going to happen. Yeah. Remember that? People would line these up. So I'm going to add 10 pounds to my bench here. I'm like, why don't you just think about adding 10 pounds to your bench in the next 6 months? Right. Because even if you added 20 pounds to your bench at a high level in a year, that's incredible progress. So if you're a well-trained person, then the expectations that you're going to see progressive overload workout to workout's not very realistic.
Well, I think if we're talking about the hypertrophy movements or accessory movements, or however you want to put that, with a higher trained person, they have to think of, and it's always been odd to me because they'll do that with the big lifts. They're going to think it through. Like, what's this going to look like over 6 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever that cycle is going to be, whatever that phase is going to be. But when it comes to the accessory movements, they don't do that, So I personally call it like a runway. Like, how long of a runway, if I want to put in a certain movement, am I going to actually be able to have, to where if I started, day one, assuming that it's once a week, it's going to change. Obviously, it's Monday, Thursday, with frequency, right? So say I want to hit the frequency of this movement 8 times, and I start that first week with 1 rep shy of failure. I'm not going to be able to run that 8 times. No, I'm just not. So I'm forced with the choice of, it's going to either be a shorter cycle, or I'm going to, for me personally, I'll build in stuff before that, which may not be as optimal, slower tempos, whatever it's going to be, to reaccumulate or reacclimate to that movement. And then that takes care of 2, where if I want to runway a 6, there's 2 that's already taken care of. Now I can go, say 3 RIR, and then 2 RIR, and then 1 RIR, and then try to get 1 more rep, out of, there's 6, it's done. But I mentally, how many exposures am I going to have with this movement? And then is that last exposure going to be my recent best? Because it should be, right? That's the progressive overload aspect. But I'm not going in naive thinking that my best is going to be the first time, Yeah, because, of course. If it was, that would be conjugate max effort work, and you just hope to God that it's going to happen that way. But, because most of the time it doesn't. But that's where I think that really a lot of the mistakes will occur. Or on the other end of that spectrum, it's just they're going to work that movement pattern and change whatever the stimulus is each time they do that movement pattern. But even that, I feel, should have some phasic structure behind it. with the intensity or the volume or whatnot. So when you look at those things, when you plan those things out, what to say for yourself to make it a little easier to kind of diagnose or to dial down on, how do you look at the intensity, the volume, and the frequency?
Wow. So that kind of leads us into the conversation of something we've been working on a lot lately. And we've kind of coined, it's called the weekly net stimulus. And so kind of the culmination of that is that instead of looking at like weekly volume, which has become a big thing, you need to look at the workout volume and the frequency. You're just kind of hitting on that. So like, how much stimulus am I getting out of this training session? How do I to keep fatigue minimized as much as possible? And then when am I going to do this again? So when you can understand the kind of the physiology metrics behind those layers, then you can really maximize training in a way that I think that most people, I made a joke about this a long time ago. And I said, the reason why guys keep asking, they always ask how many sets to do, how much volume to do, this exercise or that exercise. And I would say, at best, science can give you guidelines. I would say at best, science can give you guidelines, and everybody's different. You hear that all the time. There's individuality, blah, 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 blah. And then one day I was having this conversation with Chris, and I go, but can't we kind of figure that out? Like, if we know, like, a set to failure, or this many sets to failure, creates a cellular response of whatever magnitude, and it lasts so long. And then after that, atrophy occurs, right? So then can we get an idea of how much volume we'd want to do in a session, and then when that would need to be repeated to kind of keep us in a somewhat anabolic state and reduce the amount of time we spend catabolic? And wouldn't we kind of have an idea of how much recovery time would be needed when we look at the recovery data and volume and reps and failure and all this kind of stuff? Like, couldn't we do something like a mathematical equation with all of the physiology that we know, to where it kind of gives us kind of like a pretty good ballpark outcome of what we're looking for? And we had these long, intricate conversations. And I was like, I remember I went to bed and I was like, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and really focus on figuring out these metrics. And I woke up the next morning and Chris had sent me a spreadsheet where he'd already done all the math for it. And I was like, okay, that's cool. Thanks, man. You just totally beat me on my own thought process. But essentially, when we're talking about muscle growth, when you go in, even one set to failure, right, creates the stimulus for muscle growth. If you're doing one set to failure. So then all you have to ask yourself is, and how long does that stimulus remain after I've done it? So somewhere in the data, you're looking at somewhere between 30 and 48 hours. So those fibers that got mechanically loaded are anabolic for that period of time. So that's, again, approximate time figure. So because those fibers are never activated, those largest fiber types right at the top end, the high threshold motor unit pool, they're only activated when going and do hard training, right? We're training either to failure or very close to it. So how long do they kind of stay in that anabolic state? So, or how long is our body physiologically in an anabolic state to where it wants to create those adaptations for hypertrophy? So once that gets back to baseline and drops below baseline, those fibers start to atrophy. They start to shrink. They don't just hang around. Muscle is metabolically expensive. Your body does not want to hold on to it for no reason. You have to give it a reason to either retain it or to grow it more, right? So I was like, well, if that's the case, then regardless of what the kind of the body of research says that frequency doesn't matter, that wouldn't make sense with any of the physiology. That's also another one of those things where, Dave, I'm like, if I told you, is like, if I had you do 3 sets for bicep on Monday, and you didn't get to do biceps again for another 7 or 8 days, but if I told you to do 1 set of biceps every other day, and you're trying to grow your biceps as much as possible, and you had to pick one of those 2 options, which one would you pick?
It's changed over the years, but now I'd say every other day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like, if you think about it for a minute, you're like, well, if I'm just getting to do 1 set or 3 sets, but I don't get to do biceps again for another 8 days, it seems intuitively like, okay, well, I'm definitely going to take the other day one, right? Because there's not going to really be any fatigue, 1 set to failure, but I'm going to get a chance to stimulate that muscle to grow over and over. And I was like, well, if we could minimize fatigue as much as possible, then it really comes back to whenever that cellular response to adding, myofibrils to the, existing fiber, whenever we can kind of re-stimulate that, then we would kind of maximize out growth. So we started working on that. So my own training started changing in accordance too. It's like, well, I'd already moved into more of a, let me lop off that failure rep, because once I did that, I'm one of those guys that I'm like, I'm going to look at the data, but then I'm going to say, does this have practical application? Because I think that's one of the things that meatheads like to complain about. They're like, well, this isn't real world stuff. I'm like, well, if we put it in the real world, let's see what it looks like. So I take that stuff and I'm like, let me put it in my own training, see what happens. And once I lopped off that failure rep, I saw my own progressive overload go up. I felt recovered from my training sessions better. I don't think people realize how much fatigue really just taking everything to failure all the time just creates. And it causes a reduction in performance in your subsequent training sessions over and over and over again. Because as soon as like you do a deload and the fatigue subsides, what happens? You're like, oh man, I'm strong as hell again.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all those adaptations already existed. You just allow fatigue to subside. So you can create the least amount of fatigue in the training session. And each training session should be pretty close to maximal. You can't completely eliminate it altogether, right? I mean, you could if you train like contracted position exercises, super low reps, but there's so many things you're going to do in your training where you can create some fatigue. The idea is to minimize it as much as possible. So once I lop that, and like I said, I still have failure sets programmed in. I started saying, well, how do we get the stimulus in whatever muscle that we're training as often as possible? I just made a post the other day. If we know that volume has a nonlinear relationship, meaning you walk in, you do that first set to failure, close to failure, whatever, you have to do 5 sets to equal the amount of gross stimulus from that first set. It takes 5 more sets because of the saturation effect and because of fatigue, right? So the fibers that are active are already saturated with stimulus from that set, and then fatigue reduces how far up we can climb on the motor unit pool to activate more fibers, right? That's why volume can never be the answer to getting the last bit of muscle growth. You'd have to throw out every bit of the physiology research to make that work. Mm-hmm. It could never work. So if we can get that first set is the most stimulating one, how many times in the training week can we get a first set? I felt like that was such a very big light bulb. So if we know like, hey, that's the set that has the least amount of fatigue, we're going to get the most amount of stimulus from it. How many times in the week can we get that first set? So that was kind of where things started to change. And I was like, well, what that ultimately ends up looking like, Dave, is either kind of a full body split 3 times a week or something like an upper lower. And where we can get those first sets in there as often as possible during the week. And then I was like, from how this should work mechanistically, that should be pretty close to what we're going to get to when we're looking at like optimal hypertrophy adaptations.
Then with all that said, how would the aspect of a pump play into hypertrophy even at all?
It doesn't. Because
it's with what you're saying there, you wouldn't have enough volume, for that pump, right? So if it doesn't play, then it doesn't play.
If anything, the pump is disadvantageous.
How so?
Well, we have an in vitro study that looked at muscle swelling, which is essentially what the pump is doing. And if anything, in the in vitro study, which was done, it was done on people and rats, because people, for some reason, hate rodent studies, but it was done on both. And from what they could tell, it actually caused a reduction in force production, something called excitation, contraction, coupling failure, which happens at the neuromuscular junction, to where the action potential sent from the brain goes down the sarcolemma, gets to the T tubules and gets to the neuromuscular junction, right? It can actually communicate with the calcium ion store. So there's no muscular contractions for those fibers. So that's what we see essentially with this research. There's a multitude of other studies where they've tried to induce. There was one where they actually did BFR, blood flow restriction, in conjunction with doing an arterial infusion with vasodilators. That would have given you the most insane pump you could ever experience in your life, right? To the tune of nothing. No anabolic signaling, no muscle growth, no nothing. So that kind of comes back to where we were talking about. If we're going to say something creates a hypertrophy adaptation or some type of additive effect, we need to be able to essentially isolate it off as much as possible away from mechanical tension to show this is what's happening. But there's been a multitude of studies that have done that, and have, like, the pump doesn't serve, if anything, like I said, the pump, the myofibril protein synthesis study where they looked at short rest periods with longer rest periods, they actually concluded that the swelling occurring from the pump probably helped to reduce myofibril protein synthesis, that it was part of it. So the pump may forever, about in bodybuilding circles, was talked about, something, but if anything, the pump is disadvantageous. I'm not telling people not to get a pump or like avoid pumps. I'm just saying there's nothing that the pump is doing to promote hypertrophy. So from that standpoint, then there's another study, the Mangine study, where they did 4 sets of 10 to 12 with 1 minute rest periods compared to 4 sets of 3 to 5 with long rest periods. And these were in advanced trainers. This is one of my favorite studies. And the 4 sets of 3 to 5 beat the brakes off the 4 sets of 10 to 12 with short rest periods. Now we know short rest periods don't allow central fatigue to dissipate. So there's always a reduction in motor unit recruitment with short rest periods, but you would get a greater pump doing sets of 10 to 12 with short rest periods. So it doesn't make up ground anywhere. Again, there was the group that did longer rest periods, heavier loading, lower rep ranges, absolutely demolished the other group. So the idea, and again, I think this comes back to one of those things where it's been repeated or comes so prevalent among lifting culture that it's hard for people to get out of that mindset, but it's just not serving any purpose in terms of creating hypertrophy. Pump's fun. It's like dude makeup. Say you get a pump, right? That's what I call it. If you got a beard and a pump, dude, you're going to look like a completely different guy, right?
Yeah.
So, but in terms of like, what are we seeking out in our training? It's like, I don't ever program for like a pump. Like, it's not doing anything to create an additive stimulus effect.
All right. I need to use the restroom, take a break.
Okay.
Summer's here and so is the heat. I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym. It kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link. Okay, and staying on the pump, so I'm pretty sure I already know what your answer is going to be to this. So what would your stance be to finishers?
Probably the worst thing you can do.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually just recently made a post that I think that if there's any one really detrimental thing you can probably add into your training, would be something like a finisher. We're talking from a hypertrophy standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So if the most stimulating sets are going to be done early in the workout, the least stimulating ones will always be at the end. So, and if we also understand that high reps are going to cause exponentially more fatigue than lower rep sets, if you think about a finisher at the end of your workout, you're not really getting a lot of stimulus out of a light load, with a lot of reps in it. And then on top of that, you're just creating exponentially more muscle damage from those sets. Than basically anything that you're getting out of it. So I know, again, that's one of those things. I've done finishers pretty much over the course of the last many years. I've had lots of things I've had to be open to. That's why when somebody says something like I'm dogmatic, I'm like, I'm probably the least dogmatic person I know, because if I learn something is more effective or efficient, I want to use that. So that was one of the things that hit me. I was like, well, if we're getting to the end of the workout, we have a limited number of sets that are going to be truly productive within the workout itself. By the time we get to the end, if we're just doing like this finisher mechanical drop set, 30, 40 rep thing, it's not really giving us anything, but it's going to take away from a lot. So probably no place, in my opinion, in finishers for almost any kind of training.
Mm-hmm.
So people get mad about that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean,
other than just like you just doing it because you want to have fun. But I'm saying if you're trying to make your training as effective as possible, there's really no place to put one in.
So when you're speaking about, the frequency that you said, the upper body, lower body, upper body, or whatever it's going to be,
right,
then you're going to be dealing with more work sets per training session, right? So I'm going to pause on that because that's not really true. Because
more.
Well, I'm just fine because there's more body parts. There should be more work sets, but I'm going to pause on that one because that doesn't mean you're doing 3 sets per body part.
So
right?
Yeah, so kind of how that I spliced that out was, do you remember one of the things I remember I felt like I really enjoyed and I thought was effective that Dante put in? Remember when he had the rotating split between, it was kind of an upper lower, but 3 days a week, but it was over 3 workouts. So it's very similar. So if you think about the multitude of exercises that you use, there's almost always a bit of overlap between like the musculature that you're using. You're just doing different motions, right? So you might be loading something more at a short, something more at a lengthen. But for the most part, there's a certain amount of overlap you're having. If you have a lower body day, if you have a leg day, well, there's only so many muscles you can train. You can train glutes, hamstring, quads, adductors, right? Calves. So if you're figuring 4 or 5 exercises in there and if you're using an upper lower split, one day could be a little bit more glute dominant. You can put glutes at the, more of the beginning of the workout. You allocate a little bit more volume to those. But if you're doing even if you're doing like a quad based leg press or a squat or whatever on another day, glutes are still going to get some stimulus, right? So it's what I found is that I could do an upper lower split, rotate over kind of like 3 sessions and emphasize something a little more in one session than another. And that worked really beautifully.
So how do you manage your back training then?
So I really just didn't like training lats for a little while anymore. So it was pretty easy just to drop that out.
It's easy. Yeah.
But if you wanted to have so you're back training, right? So really what you're looking at the end of the day, you're looking at a lat movement, you're looking at an upper back movement for the most part, right?
Yeah.
So if you do, a lot of people think in terms of very absolutes. So if you do any kind of pull, if you're doing a pull, even if you're pulling through the transverse plane, like a row where you're kind of abducted at 90 degrees, there's still some lats in that. They still pull on the humerus, right? So if you're doing a row, you pull the arms behind the body, you're going to get the traps, you're going to get the lats. So they're still getting stimulus. If you're trying to be a little bit more specific, something like a lat pull down where you're in the frontal plane, you're pulling down wide, there's not much upper back in that. So that's going to be more lat specific. So if you're trying to do your upper back training, one day you might have a row that's an upper back, like dominant row, but there's still some lats in it. And then you add in maybe some trap work, like a Kelso shrug or even a vertical style shrug. But then the next workout you go in, you have more lat based pulls. And then you can keep if you do like a rear delt fly, you're still getting some upper back in there. So I didn't get too obsessive over trying to make sure everything got hit like super directly, because everything's still going to get hit. How many times have you ever had an injury, Dave, and then you realize how much that muscle gets used in doing stuff you never thought about?
Yeah.
Right. So when people try to isolate this stuff off, I'm like, there's always a dominant prime mover, right? Like in a motion, especially depending on the range of motion that we're using. But there's also stuff working in there that you're not thinking about. So if you ever got like a low back injury or ham or glute or like anything, you're like, man, I did not realize how much that worked doing other stuff I never thought about. So if you're really overloading stuff, or how often do you ever remember benching and like next day you'd be sore and muscles that like you either you contracted your lats so hard. So there's always some degree of like, hey, everything's kind of getting some work. I know this one is really getting the greatest amount of kind of concentrated tension, and that's the point of it. But I don't get so obsessive over. So if it's like an upper body day and I'm gonna like focus on one of the divisions of the pecs for like a type of press, whether it's a sternal press or it's a clavicular press, And then, that'll get a couple of sets, right, close to failure, heavy loading. And then if it's an upper back exercise, I might pick a row where I'm kind of working at like kind of this angle here, like 45 degrees of abduction, because the lats are still going to get a fair amount of work in there, but I'm really focusing on, scapular retraction. So I'm really hitting the upper back, but then the rear delts get some work in there too, right? So, and then if I wanted to emphasize traps a little more, I would focus on something more like a type of like a Kelso shrug, where it's just retraction without bringing in the rear delts, without bringing in the triceps or any of that kind of stuff. So there's little tweaks that you can make in your programming too, where you can both make sure that nothing is getting neglected, but you're also kind of emphasizing one thing a little bit in each workout to workout. And then where you place the workout in this, the motion in the sequencing, right? If it's early on in the workout, it's gonna get a little bit better work than if it's late in the workout. So you can do rotations with your workouts too, where the sequencing is a little bit different. So like I said, if one leg day is a little bit more glute dominant, your glute stuff comes first. If the other one's like more quad dominant, you're putting your quad exercises first. So I found it to work quite beautifully.
So if there's 2 lat exercises in the upper body day, are you going to stick, a pressing movement between those 2 lat exercises, or have them sequence after each other?
No, I wouldn't put 2 lat exercises in one workout anymore.
Okay.
So,
all right, well, forget that. Let's say, right, if it's back, then biceps, same situation. Are you going to follow the biceps with the back, or are you going to put some kind of pressing in between those two to be able to allow for the greater recovery?
So if it's like, I'll give you an example of like some ones I've gone through. So it's like right now I'm focusing a little bit more for the next yoke squad mesocycle, where they can have a little bit of arm emphasis. So if you do something like a hammer strength press, which I don't like for pecs because the resistance profile is terrible. It's really super hard at lockout. But if you do a close grip hammer strength press, pretty good triceps motion, right? Because you're really loading the lockout right there at the end. So you would still get some pec stimulus, but if you want a little bit more arm emphasis, you could start with a hammer strength press. And then if you did after that, you did like 1 or 2 of your tricep motions, and then you did like a bicep motion, and then finish with like, I talked about like a Kelso shrug or a shrug, then that's kind of your upper back stuff. So if it was, let's say it was the other day, and let's say I wasn't doing arm stuff and I was emphasizing more on something else, then I might start off with a lat movement, then an upper back movement, and then say like a lateral raise and finish with like a pec deck or whatever. So I don't like force myself to make sure everything's getting like something super like direct every single session, because there's a certain degree of overlap that's going to occur. If you're doing a press, triceps are still getting some, chest getting some, regardless of the resistance profile. Delts are still getting some. Somebody asked me the other day, why didn't you do delt work in your workout? I'm like, well, do the anterior delts get work in a press? Do the rear delts get work in a pull? They do, right? So, but then if you have another session, if you have like 3 upper sessions, you'll do some direct lateral delt work, like a lateral raise, or you might do a rear, like a pec deck, rear delt pec deck or something like that. So you'll add those in to where it's like the more direct stimulus, like that either way. And I have found that to work really, really fantastically.
I forgot where I was going to go with that topic of the rest periods. We didn't tap into the rest periods.
The rest periods.
Yeah.
So which part?
Well, for hypertrophy, right, there's, it's actually not even going to matter if it's between sets or between movements, right? Because it's kind of the same thing in my opinion.
If it's
unless the movements are stacked, like multiple lat movements or whatever it's going to be.
You mean like a superset?
Well, the reason I went there was, if it is a time matter and it's an upper body day, then if you superset with a long enough rest period and it is, a lat movement, a chest movement, then a lat movement, or whatever it's going to be by the time you get back to the lat movement.
So that's definitely, if you're trying to do some time saving, one of the type of supersets that can work well with that is if you're pairing like antagonist muscle groups, right? Like, so if you're doing a chest, like you said, I think that's where you're going with that.
Yeah.
So if you say, hey, I want to fit more motions in here into this workout, but I don't want my workout to span like 90 minutes. You know what I mean? 2 hours. I don't like to be in the gym. I don't know if you're like this. I've never wanted to be in the gym more than an hour. I feel like there comes that point where you know you're just not getting much out of what you're doing. You know what I mean? After you've been in for like an hour and a half, like I just don't feel like that you can maintain an effort level at really high levels for like 2 hours. It just, anybody who says that, I'm like, you're just not, there's a lot of junk volume going on. You're not training very hard.
Well, if they're telling you to take 6 minutes between sets.
Or that, remember back in the days when guys who we used to laugh about that would bench for like 3 hours, do 5 sets.
Yeah.
Dude, you don't need to rest 10 minutes between sets. So if you were, keep me on this topic so I don't deviate too much, because I'll give you some good stuff here. So if you were doing antagonist, either supersets or an alternating set, so an alternating set, you know, where you do like a chest press and then you rest for, let's say, just a minute to allow, you know, heart rate to come down a little bit, cardiorespiratory demands kind of reduce. And then you can do a back exercise. Well, because those are different muscles with different nerve innervations, you don't end up with the same degree of central nervous system fatigue, because you're using different nerve innervations. Like you still have to, central nervous system fatigue is operating at the brain and spinal level. But at the spinal level, you're dealing with those consistent repetitions that are happening with those action potentials that travel down the spine over and over again. So it's the same nerve innervations, same muscle group working over and over and over again. Then the magnitude of those signals gets reduced due to that fatigue. But if you're using antagonist type muscle groups, like a biceps and a triceps, or, you know, chest and back or whatever, then you can effectively kind of stack those a little bit better, as you were saying, save a little bit of time and kind of get a little bit more work in. I don't really do those for just the simple fact is, in most gyms now, it's hard to hold on to 2 machines at one time. If you have your own place like this right here, I would be fantastic, right? Because you could really condense some good work into a short period of time and actually kind of work on those upper echelons of what I consider the workout volume, which is still pretty low comparatively, I think, what's recommended. But it would definitely be able to allow you, like if you were even just resting, like I said, just a minute, like say do a press, you know, 5 or 6 reps, and then rest a minute, and then do something like a lat pull like a minute later, you can condense that in there a little bit better. I've just found in most commercial gyms now, it's tough to hold on to 2 pieces of equipment at one time, right? Like somebody will take your stuff. Yeah. So like, even if you put your bag in front of the stuff and put your drink on there, I've had people take plates off the exercise I'm using. Right? Like, I'm using this exercise. I'm like, no, dude, I'm there. I'm literally standing in front of the machine. You're taking plates off. So, yes, that could be an approach. The rest time between sets thing has gotten people, have gotten, I think, like almost religious fanatics about arguing this, when I think they don't understand mechanistically what matters is that you really need to be recovered before you do your next set. So that depends on your training status. If you're a beginner and you do a concentration curl for 6 reps, you probably don't need to rest for 3 minutes. You probably recovered. You know, you remember being a beginner, you could do a set all out to failure. You feel fine in 30 seconds, right? You get advanced, you could do a set of curls for 8 reps. You need those 2 minutes, right? So there's a big difference between the effort and the degree of kind of recovery needed from beginner to advanced level. So there's a lot of things that be taken into context. The most important thing is we just don't want anything that's creating a type of interference effect on the next set. So if your cardio vascular hasn't kind of come back to where you feel recovered, you don't need to do your next set. If you still got that burning in your muscles from metabolite accumulation and acidosis, you don't need to do your next set. So those things need to be allowed to subside. So if I'm doing like a set of leg press 6 to 8 reps, very heavy, I might take, or the worst one of all time, like a Bulgarian split squat for whatever reason, like those, like you need like about a year between sets of Bulgarian split squats, right? So it depends exercise specific too. And I just tell people, look, probably I'm slightly to blame because I was like, longer rest periods are better than short ones. And then the data, you have to look at the data, whether they were measuring 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. There seems to be something that definitely happens more than 2 minutes later from a recovery standpoint that happens, believe it or not, just between 90 seconds and 2 minutes. So that extra 30 seconds allows more metabolite accumulation to dissipate, which allows us to, when that dissipates, we don't have that same afferent feedback, that mechanism that we get that says, hey, this really sucks and is hard. So you kind of have that metabolite accumulation dissipate a bit. So the next set, you can apply a greater degree of effort. Cardiorespiratory demands tend to come back down quite a bit. So you just don't want anything that's interfering or making the next set feel unnecessarily harder than it is.
Now, are those trainable capacities? In other words, will you adapt to be able to become better, to recover in shorter periods of time?
Yeah. So if you're out of shape and your cardiovascular sucks, right? You know this.
Yeah.
Like once you get into shape, like recovering from a set feels much easier. I don't know, other than we do 100% understand that if there is very short rest periods taken, they consistently show less myofibril protein synthesis, which is a cellular process that creates hypertrophy. But I don't know if it's just because nobody's really fully recovering in 60 seconds. You know what I mean? Like that's a pretty short rest period if you do something for any substantial amount of reps, or in some way, like that was the one, like they felt like the swelling that was occurring from the shorter rest periods, the pump, was prohibiting those higher degrees of motor unit recruitment. Which again comes back to why I said the pump's probably, if anything, is detrimental to good training. So, but I think the most important thing is, even if you, and you should know this too, if you're doing higher rep sets, you tend to get better at them over time in terms of tolerating kind of that pain perception. All of that stuff becomes somewhat trainable. So again, the magnitude of it, I think, is what you kind of have, it gets debated, is like, how much better do you get at tolerating pain? And do you need to be getting better at tolerating pain, or just not doing high reps that feel super painful? So
yeah, I mean, those are the questions. I mean, the same question could be applied to the number of, effective sets that you can do in a period of a week, as you become, for lack of a better concept, in better shape, what you would expect that would go up, because if it always stayed the same.
So if the cardiorespiratory demand was like there, right, and you said, hey, I'm gonna tack on 30 minutes of like power walking to my days, well, then you would not have the same cardiovascular demand, right, from one set to the next. You would be more recovered. So your effort will be able to be higher in those subsequent sets. Anything that makes the set feel harder, right, takes up space in the brain, right, that can be used for motor unit allocation. So it reduces the effectiveness of it. So think about, like, if anything that makes a set or an exercise feel more difficult, as soon as you take that part out, you can move more load, you can do more reps with it or whatever. If you go from a standing press, right, as soon as you sit down and you take away those coordination and stability bands, you can press more load. So anything that's adding to our perception of effort in an exercise or a set is going to reduce how effective it is. So it's kind of like another thing. People think, well, if it's harder, it's got to be better. Well, it depends on what your goals are. So if we can make it to where the exercise itself feels easier and we can load it more and do more reps, that actually makes it more productive. So anytime you change something within that exercise to where you can substantially increase the loading. Now we're talking about working within the same ranges of motion, not just like shortening the range of motion, but where you can suddenly move more load because you reduce a demand of that exercise, makes it more productive from a hypertrophy standpoint.
As going to go in a little different direction here, as a hobbyist when it comes to the research. So let me explain what I mean by that. So, I will read the research, I'll skim the research reviews. I think Lane's got one, there's Mass, there's 4 of them that I'll get, and I'll scan. I'm only going to look at the shit that I think applies to me. So, and that's just a review of somebody else's opinion or whatever it is. And so that's kind of my experience over the past decade there. Or somebody will cite something that I think looks fucked up. Then I'll go look at what they cite. And so this is where the real hobbyist comes in, and typically find that a lot of times it doesn't even it's not even a study that's what they're talking about. I don't know if they just have some list of citations they just copy and paste shit from, to put it out there, assuming nobody's actually going to click on it.
Right.
The CDC was great at doing that a few years ago, by the way. But anyhow, that's a whole other topic. But with that context in mind, which is somebody that's not doing deep dives on all this other kind of stuff, but as an outsider kind of looking in, there's been a lot of research, previously on eccentric, right? And then a lot of research just recently on that stretch position. So the question I would have is, are we waiting for the research on the concentric position? And are we waiting on the research on the contracted position? And 5 years from now, are we going to have all these studies about how that concentric part is this main emphasis, or is it all being looked at now?
Yeah, I wonder I don't know how the stretch people are going to walk back all this stretch stuff in 5 years when we've been aware for a very long time that it's the concentric that is actually giving you muscle, right? Yeah. It's the concentric. That's where I talked with a guy who's like one of the number one sarcomerogenesis guys in the world. He doesn't even consider the stretch position adaptations to be hypertrophy. Like he's like, your hypertrophy is radial growth. It's myofibrils in parallel. So he's like, it took him a while to understand what I was asking him. So there's a couple of things that are completely wrong that all these people that are talking about stretch that keep saying. Number one, well, stretch adaptations are sarcomere in a series. They increase, either the sarcomeres themselves will increase in length for a period of time, and then the fascicle will increase in length, and then we'll get the addition of sarcomeres in a series. And we know that this happens. We don't even need to get into the idea that we have to get in there and use like ultrasound to like actually measure them out. We have done that, but we know because of the angle of peak torque changes. So where you see an increase in strength at those longer motions, and that's because more sarcomeres have been added in a series, right? So they're producing force now at a longer length. So they'll say, well, that's how you're getting more cross-sectional area. I'm like, that's literally one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. So the majority of your muscle growth is I'm talking 90+% easily, is all going to come from radial growth. It's all going to come from increasing cross-sectional area. That happens through myofibrogenesis, the increase of myofibrils in parallel. So that happens through concentric contractions. So eccentric contractions or stretch position stuff when you're in the stretch, or when you look at distraction studies where they actually lengthen the bone and do that kind of stuff. You can watch, for the people that have said, this is why I said that's the dumbest thing ever, you can watch a reduction in pennation angle and you can watch a reduction in cross-sectional area in those distraction studies as longitudinal hypertrophy occurs, as sarcomeres in a series happen. So the idea, you have to separate this out by either eccentric or static stretch or stretch position stuff and say what adaptations are occurring there. They're very limited. And some muscles do not actually really experience them at all. And we do measure them by fascicle lengths. The idea that they're going to create more cross-sectional area because it's training at a longer length there's literally nothing to support that. I don't even know why it's said. So the majority of your muscle growth comes from those concentric contractions, right? So I don't know why there has, other than I think that if you're taking noobs, which most of the research, and we need studies using untrained people and trained people, because we need to see kind of what adaptations are occurring and then the magnitude of those adaptations that are occurring. That matters. That helps us a lot. But all of this whole that there's a building body of research showing everything grows longer at stretch, that's not true. If we understand that a stretch position or an eccentric or a static stretch creates a very specific type of adaptations, we see it in the eccentrics or stretch positions to occur in terms of a fascicle length increase, because that's a signification that sarcomeres in a series increased. And we know this through, like I said, the angle of peak torque, that it changes. They can't ever seem to get around that. I'm like, so why did the angle of peak torque change? And that pretty much ends the discussion. So if we know those adaptations are limited, and that's what most of these studies are using non-trained people, we expect to get those adaptations. So some people are like, they think I'm not anti-stretch at all. I'm like, there's lots of muscles, mostly in the lower body and the pecs. We know there's going to grow well from longer length motions, but it's limited in terms of magnitude, scope, time frame, all that kind of stuff. You still need to train them at stretch positions to maintain those adaptations, but stretch positions also increase the magnitude of muscle damage, which is going to prolong recovery. Not just localized, but when muscle damage is present, there's an inflammation effect with myokines, all sorts of stuff that's going on that also reduces motor unit recruitment. So if you have a bunch of muscle damage from the workout you did on Monday, Tuesday's workout is going to be subpar, right? Anecdotally, if I tell you this, you'll probably maybe have an aha moment. You ever have like a banger workout on Monday, like crush, and then you go in Tuesday and it's just well below what you're normally.
Oh yeah, I mean that should be.
You almost never have two banger workouts in a row, right? Like even if Monday is just like good, you can kind of have a good Tuesday one. But if Monday is like on, like, you burn the world down, set it on fire, you can almost assure Tuesday is going to kind of suck, right? So that's just because we kind of tend to push up against those extremes when we're having a good one. We train like, everything to failure. We add more load, and, we kind of create those fatigue. We do more sets. We kind of create those fatiguing mechanisms. So longer position stuff, it basically causes more intracellular calcium ions into the cytoplasm, which when that happens, there's an activation, of proteases called calpains, and those are the ones that do the muscle damage. So when that happens, there's really nothing you can do to reverse that. So the idea to train everything at longer muscle lengths is pretty opposite of how we want to be approaching training. Like we want to actually, especially once we have those adaptations, we want to limit the amount of stretch position, longer muscle lengths that we're training muscles at, just enough to keep those adaptations, and then focus mainly around the contraction stuff. Really funny you brought up the contraction stuff, because I think people are missing the boat on it, and that the concentric contraction stuff is where we're going to get our growth.
Now we go back years when tempo was a thing that everybody was putting in their programs. There'd be four numbers: the eccentric, the stretch, concentric, and then the peak contraction at the top. So where would that peak contraction fall?
So I've narrowed down program to making sure people use a controlled, like a slow-ish, but controlled eccentric, but not because you're getting extra. I think when we hit on that earlier, if you're trying to standardize your range of motion and you're trying to standardize your execution, I find that using a controlled eccentric makes all of that stuff way easier. If you're not using a slow eccentric, controlled eccentric, your execution can get a little bit more wild. So if we're trying to adequately gauge if progressive overload is like occurring most effectively, then standardizing as much stuff as we can to where it's the same workout to workout. So that way we're not cheating something so we think progress is happening, but maybe we rested longer between sets, or maybe we were a little more loose in our execution this time. So I think with like the tempo stuff, if you're using a tempo that is like adequate, like there's some motions where a tempo is not always, it doesn't work as well. Like if you're doing a lateral raise, trying to lower laterals really slowly, just doesn't, the moment arms forever. It's as long as you can get to the shoulder, right? So just out there lowering, and you're not getting any extra like real hypertrophy. So it's not super beneficial to that motion. Doesn't mean that you don't still want to lower under control to kind of manage your ROM and execution, but there's some movements where they lend themselves to better tempos in terms of like slow lowering or controlled lowering, where other ones you don't have to be quite as dogmatic about using a slower one. From a like holding peak contraction thing, again, I think that for the most part comes back to kind of just standardizing your execution. So I think what you're probably thinking of is like shorter position movements, maybe like a leg extension, or something like that. And I think that it really just going to come back to making sure you've just standardized your execution for those motions. So that way you're saying, hey, if I added 2 reps here today, was it exactly the same way I did before? So from a benefit of like, is it, if I hold the top for 2 seconds comparatively to getting to the top and just lowering immediately? So what that's essentially going to cause is, and you should know this from like just doing it, is anytime that you have more metabolite accumulation, the sooner you're going to lose reps off in that set. So if I hold the top for 2 or 3 seconds on a leg extension, there's a greater degree of ATP usage, there's a greater degree of metabolite accumulation. So I'm going to lose some reps off the top of that set.
Now, could that be a good thing if we're talking about effective reps, though?
Generally speaking, if you're looking at like that metabolite accumulation thing, that's just going to, it's kind of like washed out on one end or the other. So if you have any place that you have like a high degree of force production, we have a lot of cross bridging that is going on, you have to automatically have a higher degree of ATP usage. So there's going to be probably more feedback saying, hey, this really sucks because of, again, the metabolite accumulation. So I think you have to find that balance of, am I losing enough, so many reps off the top of this to where, if I do it this way, if I don't do it this way, I get like 6 more reps. But if I do it this way, I'm getting, basically what I'm doing is I'm getting, say, 3 or 4 reps less comparatively. And is that the same stimulus? And my guess would say no. Because again, you're just getting feedback that this sucks and is really hard. So you have to deduct whether or not because I think there's some research showing if you make eccentrics, the eccentric lowering too long, that the fatigue just ends up cutting into the concentric reps that you're going to get. And you should know that probably from times where you've done really long eccentrics. It eventually blows your concentric repetition count out. So fatigue can interfere with us getting to really maximal amounts of motor unit recruitment.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the most important thing is the concentric, basically, with as greatest intent as you can do.
If I say that, somebody automatically assumes.
Well, if we were to rank it, okay.
No. What I was going to say is, I said that. I was like, if you have a concentric, you want the effort to be very high, right? But immediately people start assuming you're talking about doing like explosive style like movements, right? And I'm saying, well, if
I would throw that in there, it would be an isokinetic machine.
Yeah.
So then we're taking out that.
Then you're just like full effort.
Yeah.
So where it's like maximal effort right from the go.
Yeah. So if you take everything out of the equation except for that, and if we were to look at that, would that create more hypertrophy than, a non-isokinetic,
right?
Stimulus? And I don't know the answer to that, but my guess is going to be no, because everything's going to still have to work together.
I think that if you were literally going down to where you're doing like measurements to very specific muscle groups, you're probably going to get somewhat equal type of adaptations. Say if you're doing an isometric depending on the muscle length, it's difficult, right? Because with an isometric
or isokinetic.
Yeah, or isokinetic, right? But like with an isometric, I'm tying these in together.
Okay, yeah.
So with an isometric, right, if you're holding it at a certain length for a certain period of time, certain degree of effort, like principally speaking, you should get a similar degree of outcome if you can match that up in some kind of way with like dynamic repetitions, right? Looking at the concentric. So with the isokinetic type machine where you're just removing, right? Like it's just concentric based stuff. If you could do that, that's something actually that Chris and I have talked about. It's like once you got somebody more advanced, like because they're not getting any growth out of eccentric based stuff, right? Like if you're advanced and you're doing like the eccentric's not really giving you anything, if you could just overload the concentric, that would be where you want to go, because you're going to reduce or eliminate the majority of muscle damage related fatigue. And then you're still going to be able to climb up high on that motor unit recruitment scale. So there's something to be said for that, but nobody's really explored it to like super in depth.
Yeah, it would be. Louis had one when I first came to Westside, which is basically like a Smith machine.
Yep.
That the more force you put into it, the slower it's going to move. But and I used it after my first pec tear, right? Because obviously I'm not putting a lot of force into it. I just came out of surgery.
Right.
But I could put in the maximum force I could put into it.
Yep.
With all that and not have that eccentric component and all the other stuff.
Exactly.
But there's a lot of limitations there as it's on rails. It's good for like maybe a squat if you can get it like stabilization. There's a lot of limiting factors associated with it. Number one being the movements that you can use it for. But, anecdotally, I do think it helped me, but it also didn't stay in the gym for after we moved. So, if it was as great as if it had a profound impact, then it would have made it to every gym that we ever went to.
Yeah.
So that's how that's how I could always tell what worked and what didn't, like what makes it to the next gym and what gets thrown out, or sold from there. With the recovery and the fatigue management that you're talking about, there's the systemic fatigue, which you talked about a little bit. Expand on that some, because if there's one area that I think people really get messed up, it's that, what we were talking about. That
I don't think most people understand. So like when you use the term like systemic fatigue, it's kind of that term gets thrown out a lot, but it's a vague term because we have multiple systems that can experience fatigue at different degrees for different reasons. So when somebody says systemic fatigue, like I said, one of the old things people used to say is like heavier loads cause more systemic fatigue. It's just not true. Like we have a ton of research showing that that's absolutely not true. So if we're going to say fatigue, we have to define which system that we're talking about, and then we have to define why fatigue exists, and then even pulling back further away from that is to define what fatigue is, which is a temporary and reversible reduction in performance, right? So if fatigue exists, then are we talking about fatigue that exists within the workout? Or are we talking about, and that's going to be mostly at the central nervous system level. There will be some peripheral level fatigue that can occur, all depending on what's going on. But if we're talking about central nervous system fatigue within the workout, mostly it's going to occur due to, like I said, interference mechanisms like metabolite accumulation, cardiorespiratory demands, stuff like that. It can even be some stuff that's going on like pro-inflammatory cytokines that have been released within the workout itself, which makes, everything feel hard. But that's central nervous system fatigue within the workout, and those happen at the brain and the spine for different reasons, can be measured. And that's the other thing, is that fatigue, all different types of fatigue are measurable. They're not like how you feel. So you've probably had this happen to you many times, where you feel lethargic, tired, get into the gym after a few warm-ups, crush your whole workout, hit PRs. So clearly central nervous system fatigue did not exist, despite how you felt. Feeling tired is not central nervous system fatigue. You can feel tired and not have central nervous system fatigue prevalent at that time. You've probably had these. These are the weirdest ones, where you go into the gym, you feel pretty good. You know where I'm going with this.
Oh, yeah.
And you do your warm-ups. Warm-ups feel good, but as soon as you get to like your heaviest loads, it just ain't there. Right? That's the weird one, because you feel good going in, and then you feel it drop off very suddenly, right? Like you're like, man, just like the bottom drops out. And I think in those times that we feel okay, but the central nervous system fatigue exists because we're a couple of reps shy of our normal, and then after that, we're way below everything else. Those are like, you're like, what is going on? So I felt good coming in. I felt good on the warm-ups, and it just doesn't happen. And the other ones, you start warming up, you felt like crap going into the session. Like, man, I'm about to burn some worlds down right now. Right. So the central nervous system fatigue is a measurable condition. So one of the ways, for example, you could measure that is anything that's dynamic explosive, because that requires that high degree of effort. And so are we climbing up high enough on the motor unit recruitment pool that we can recruit those fibers? So if you did something like, let's say you set a baseline for a vertical jump, you had the little deals, you jump up and jump. And you slap. What are those called?
Oh God, you asked me too soon. Vert something.
You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. The NFL use them for combine, jump up, slap them, however many of the little tile things, whatever they're called. So if you spend a month creating vertical jump adaptations to where you kind of know after 3 or 4 weeks of like doing your vertical jump, you could get an idea of when you're fresh, you're not suffering from fatigue, like take a couple of weeks off training, you could set a baseline for central nervous system fatigue using that vertical jump. So if you wanted to, you could literally go in at the start of your workout, test your vertical, and see how much central fatigue you're suffering.
Couldn't you do that with a grip dynamometer?
With a what?
The grip.
No, so that was the one for a while people thought, but what it appears is that you need to be able to, because you're dealing with small muscles, and central nervous system fatigue seem to affect your larger main muscle groups more than something like your grip strength stuff. So you would definitely want to do it with something where you're creating a dynamic, explosive movement with where you're having to activate larger muscles. So that's kind of the deal there. So that would be for testing central nervous system fatigue to see if it's prevalent, if it exists within that workout. Peripheral fatigue would be different because it's at the actual muscular level. You can test that with something that tests low frequency fatigue, which is something nobody's ever going to do. However, if muscle damage exists, as we talked about earlier, if muscle damage exists within that, you do this workout on Monday, but you create a bunch of muscle damage, it's going to cause a reduction in motor unit recruitment. And there's going to be a type of feedback. It's going to reduce your ability to get up high on that motor unit recruitment scale. So you will actually suffer from central nervous system fatigue due to that muscle damage. But that would be testable with your vertical jump, right? So you'd kind of know. So within the workout itself, you would have an idea of whether or not you're suffering from central nervous system fatigue. So as I said, within the workout, anything that's like metabolite or cardiorespiratory creates that type of interference, that tends to dissipate within 20 or 30 minutes post-workout. So everything kind of tends to subside there. The central nervous system fatigue that is caused by muscle damage, that can go on for quite some time. So, and then the other one is, so we're dealing with two different systems there. We're dealing with the central nervous system, and then we're dealing with basically the muscular system, right? Which can also suffer from fatigue. So that can suffer from fatigue, a type of fatigue where essentially we don't have communication between action potentials and calcium that drives muscular contraction. So, and that's called excitation contraction coupling failure. So that can happen. Let's say you do too much stretching before you do the workout. We have some really good research on that. So there's a reduction in force production when you do stretching before the workout. It actually reduces the hypertrophy outcomes because you don't actually get mechanical tension at those highest fibers that you get if you just wait and do the stretching after. So that creates an interference fatiguing mechanism too. And then the other one is that gets tossed around a lot will be like the autonomic nervous system stuff, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which is mostly impacted by aerobic stuff. So remember for a while, people were trying to use heart rate variability stuff to determine if recovery was happening, but the recovery that's happening with that stuff is more aerobic based. So if you had a component in your training that was aerobic challenging, you would see a reduction in performance. But there's quite a few HRV studies looking at strength training, and even when HRV, when you're looking at that type of fatigue that's present, it doesn't actually impact like strength training if it doesn't have a cardiovascular domain. So that was kind of one of those things people got messed up a few years ago, was trying to use HRV training to determine if they were covered between strength training workouts. So if there's an aerobic demand, it'll affect that. If there's not, then that's not a fatigue you need to be worried about. So that's kind of when they say systemic fatigue, I think a lot of times what they're meaning is a symptom of almost like lethargy. They're feeling lethargic or tired or whatever. But all fatigue is measurable in some kind of way. So when you split the fatigue up and you look at them across those things, they're generally caused by different things within the training, and then they have different time spans that they last, and then they have different ways they impact the training performance itself.
What I find is they need to understand the cost of what they're doing, right? So
yes. That's a really great way to put it.
If it's a power lifter that the day feels great and it's whatever, the last week of fives, doesn't really matter, and it feels really, really good, they need to understand if they're going to do another set, 30, 40 pounds heavier, what the cost of that's going to be. Because on that day, right, they're thinking, this is great, this feels good, but that cost may be whatever if they're deadlifting 4 days later, it may come at the cost of what that is. And that's fine as long as they're actually thinking this through and balancing
That's
this
what I was
out.
talking about earlier. It was like, oh, if I'm going to do this set of like this back off set of 8, 15, 20 reps of failure, what is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yes.
Is it giving me anything that I wasn't already getting? Is it detracting from tomorrow's session or the next day's? And that was the shift I had in my thinking over the past few years, was like, if you can reduce fatigue as much as possible, then you maximize your performance in every way from there on out. So I think people have had their vision backwards for quite some time, in that it shouldn't be about maximizing the stimulus. It should be about getting the stimulus and minimizing the fatigue part. I don't think you need the maximal stimulus. I don't think you can get to the maximal stimulus without incurring a significant amount of fatigue.
Yeah, but that then brings up this weird dichotomy of you have to have enough stimulus to need the restoration to recover from, right? You need to, because I think we're kind of coming out of that trend now, where the overemphasis on restoration, but yet you're not even training hard enough to really create the damage that you think that you need all this restoration shit from. Does that, have you seen that?
I think that one of the things,
because there's two components. There's the stimulus and then the recovery.
Yes.
Right. So for a while there,
the recovery is really, it's different, I think, than most people realize. So the recovery part is the cellular process of creating the adaptions, right? And it does happen, like I talked about, so you go in and you train, even if you just do one set, you have created the stimulus for adaptation. Whether adaptation occurs or not is a multitude of other things, but you can do one set, and then the actual cellular process that creates that adaptation happens. So a lot of people are like, well, one set won't do it. Yeah, one set will do it. Like we said, if I ask you to do one set of bicep curls, one set 3 times a week, or, for 4 days a week, just on non-consecutive days, or 3 sets one day, which one are you going to choose? If you're trying to grow your biceps, you're like, well, it's going to be the every other day one. So I think that when people talk about the recovery aspect, it's really not, in my opinion, the way that I view it now is very different. Because I used to think it was like, well, we know now 100% you don't tear muscle down and it grows back bigger, right? Yeah. Like that's not how it works.
I'd be huge from all the surgeries that I had. All the shit that I tore.
Every time you tear something, you're like, man, look at my hamstring now. It's just like coming off my leg. So I think the recovery aspect is it's the non-training time. And so that the cellular process is running its course to create functional proteins, right? So that's the hypertrophy adaptation. Like, we're not dealing with neural adaptations. We're just talking about the hypertrophy adaptation. So you go in and you do 1 set, 2 sets, 3 sets, or whatever. If we can create it so that there's basically almost no fatigue, that's long-lasting fatigue from those, then we're not, because the repair process and the hypertrophy process is the same cellular mechanism. So if we have a high degree of repair and regeneration that's going on, then it robs the hypertrophy cellular process of what it needs to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if myofibril protein synthesis.
Here's this. It makes sense, but how many people are going to actually utilize that information in their own training?
I think that's because, Dave, we still haven't had a nice shift away from helping people understand active recovery is not doing anything to help us actually. Once those physiological mechanisms are in place from muscle damage, there's nothing you can do to reduce that. There's no reduction in that time. So active recovery, we got data on that. It's like, it doesn't do anything. So active recovery doesn't do anything. Sleep, like if you're getting 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep a night, you're meeting the demands needed for recovery, right? So sleeping more than that isn't doing anything. Protein intake, like that's another one. People, I think the old adage of, they would always just say, check your sleep, check your diet, whatever. I think they're somewhat overstated. So I don't think that, okay, not even think, I know for the most part, anybody that's remotely involved in kind of our area, they eat enough protein.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's something people used to say, you know, decades ago, is like the general pop did not eat enough protein. Anybody who's involved in this space probably eats enough protein, right? Do they have a protein powder container in their cabinet? My guess is yes. They probably have a protein powder. They probably have a creatine. They probably have a glutamine.
Mm-hmm.
They probably have a pre-workout. I'm guessing that protein intake is not the issue. And we just had, I don't even keep up with the diet stuff anymore. It's like, you know, I said, that's just not a big interest. But there was just a study that came out again. I mean, we've had studies on protein since the 70s. It's about 0.8 grams per pound, shows that you're meeting the demands for recovery, right? So slamming a bunch of protein and sleeping a whole bunch doesn't speed up how fast you're going to recover. And I don't even think, now I'm going to get you in a lot of trouble for saying this one. And I think at some point I'll be proven right on this. I don't think anabolics increase your recovery that much. So most of that is based off of like Anavar burn victim stuff. But do you remember those studies where I don't think we could do them anymore because they're probably not deemed ethical. But do you remember those studies we had where they were giving guys like 600 mega tests and they would put them in like one group? Mm-hmm. And then there was a control group, and there was a group that sat at home and did nothing, and then took 600 mega tests a week. And there was a natural group that trained but didn't get it. And there was a group that trained and got the 600 mega tests. So what it looks like is that you just get a growth stimulus off the anabolics that have nothing to do with training. In fact, that's the fact. So the group that sat at home and did nothing grew more than the natural group that trained over those, 10 weeks. They grew way more. And if you look at if you go find the graph for this, the group that trained and then the group that sat at home and took steroids, if you take the group that trained and got steroids, if you look at those, if you stack those, it's almost equal. And then they also had that same guy did a group where he did 20 weeks of, I think it was tests at the same level, or may have been more, but the average was 20 pounds of muscle gain doing nothing. They just sat at home and they gave them tests. So that's not a training stimulus. Now, I'm not saying there's no recovery at all. Because I think we know, like, if you could take, there's certain compounds you can take that definitely feel like you recover faster. Like Deca seem to have kind of that anecdotally that going on, but I don't think that the recovery, I think what happens is you're getting the training stimulus as if you were a natural guy, and then you're getting that growth stimulus that's just coming from the compounds. And that's what that looks like. And when I was on, what I found was I didn't notice a difference. Like, I didn't get on, was suddenly able to do like inordinate amount of like volume. I tried it because like when you first get on, you're like, oh, I'm about to crush, right? Like I'm about to go do 20 sets for chest or whatever. And I found after a few weeks, I'm like, I can't do this. So I went back to just training like I trained as a natural guy and saw all sorts of results.
Anecdotally, I've seen the inverse.
Yeah.
Where if somebody goes on, they can't do as much as somebody that's clean. You know, so that somebody that's
because you feel like ass.
Yeah, well, yes. Well, I think there's several components to it. Maybe you're more aggressive, so your intent, you know, for each repetition is going to be
Dave,
higher.
What's funny is now that you mention that, that's exactly what I experienced.
Yeah.
I actually found as a natural, I could do more work.
Yes. And I've seen that so many times that I can almost say with as close to certainty as I possibly know that
I just never really thought about it, but you're actually right. I couldn't do as much.
Yes. And I think that's because you're contracting with more force, you know, and I don't know if the anabolics are doing that or if it's the aggression that's doing that, but something's changing with that intent.
Well, we do have, I think, some non-conclusive research that shows that anabolic guys get hyperplasia, so the addition of actual new fibers. So if you think about it, if there was like an addition of new fibers, you're contracting more fibers than you've had at that point, right? So if that's the case, then you would take the magnitude of all those other fatiguing mechanisms and they would go up exponentially, just like you would experience with like the strength increase, the muscle mass growth increase. So there's a multitude of things that could be going on there from fatigue standpoint. But that is true. Like I found, as a natural guy, it feels like you can definitely go in and do more stuff. And when you're on, it feels like all you got in you is about 1 or 2 good sets.
Yes. And I've seen that, like I said, I've seen that with almost everybody that I've spoken to with.
I don't think guys realize training on is hard.
Yeah, it's harder.
It's harder. Like, yeah, you can move more loading stronger, but like it's difficult. When Jim and I used to talk a lot, he used to laugh his ass off because like when I would be getting ready to go into a meet, like once you get all the compounds coming in and you're bloated and everything gives you a pump, including like in your hands. You know what I'm talking about? I'd put a plate on one side of the squat bar and walk around the rack, have to bend over, pick up a plate, put it on. And I had to lay down after that because the low back pump would be so strong. And I remember Wendler laughing his ass off about me because I could do my squats and then I'd have to contemplate whether or not I could do my pulls after that. And then I'd sit in the parking lot and I couldn't drive out of the parking lot because my low back would be cramping so hard. I do not miss being on.
Yeah.
I think people have this, and I guess that it saddens me to watch the kids nowadays get on so early and running hard compounds and stuff like that, because they could learn so much about how their body responds to good training and good nutritional approaches. But there's just this, this kind of what permeates throughout social media is that these kids just want all this validation from everybody looking at them.
Long-term wise, they're still going to have to learn all those things. This is what I don't think they understand.
Otherwise, what are you left with, Dave?
Well, exactly. But if you learn them first, then you have more tools.
Your training, yeah.
Yeah, you have more tools to play with, where what we typically see if they go on too soon, and this goes not just present day, but back to when I started decades ago, is if that's the first card that's played, then when things stall, you just double that card.
Yeah, I remember that. I said you got a lot of gems. You used to say that was your ace card.
Yeah,
it's the last one you got left to play. And well, what I said was the only thing that you're left with, if you don't learn really good physiological training approaches, is all you're left with is upping the dose.
Yes.
That's what you're left with. If you do not ever figure out how to maximize your training approach, whether you're on or you're natural. And I think they look the same. I really do. I think they look the same. And if the one person is saying, well, I could do more and recover from more, this is what I'm going to say that. I think that's probably placebo for being on. I think that's probably a placebo effect, because I think it's when you first get on and like I said, you think you're going to conquer the world and just grow and do all this kind of stuff. That has a significant degree of mental stimulation as far as how you're going to approach training, right? I think that's largely a placebo effect, because they had that one fake D-ball study. Do you remember that one? Where they didn't give them D-ball, but they told them they would, and they just crushed.
I got to find that, man, because that's a good one.
That's one of my favorites, because they said whoever was like at the top tier after like the 10 weeks of this training study was going to get selected to go to the next one and be given D-ball. And so that means those guys, I want you to think about this. This is how strong the placebo effect is. For anybody who goes, well, that's not true because I got on, I did way more. I'm like, okay. So the placebo effect is so strong. Those guys were hitting PRs at the end, crushing like their PRs at the end of that study, got selected to go to the next phase and continued to crush PRs because they thought they were getting D-ball. Think about that.
I know it's a crazy one.
But it wasn't D-ball. It was a placebo.
Yeah.
So for the guys who are like, well, I know I got on and I did way more and blah, 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 so I was recovering, I'm like, that can just be attributed to placebo effect. Now, I'm not saying there's no recovery, because I wouldn't say that because I don't know. But what I can look at in terms of what looks like is happening between like being a natural and being an enhanced guy, I think the training that you're doing, if it's really effective natural, you don't need to change anything if you get on. Just get on and take the benefits that come with getting on. You're going to grow really great. If that training caused you to grow really great when you're a natural guy, it's going to be, it's going to still work just as well when you're on. I don't think you need to change your training approaches.
Were there any topics you wanted to go over I didn't bring up?
No, you've pretty much.
Well, I got one. I got one to throw at you.
You've had all.
Yeah, so I'm gonna piggyback.
All right, guys, I'm here at Elite FTS. I'm at the compound. Nobody is watching right now, so bear with me. I found some bands that I need really, really bad. I'm gonna throw them in my bag and take them home with me, so don't tell anybody. Bands are absolutely great. If you're looking for the safest way to train to become fast, to become explosive, become strong, safety, 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 safety. Watch some videos about using bands. Why should you buy the Elite FTS bands? I swear. Promise you guys, these bands will last longer than any other bands you will buy anywhere. They're a little more expensive. They're gonna last a heck of a lot longer. EliteFTS.com. Get your bands just like I am. See ya.
Summer's here and so is the heat. I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym, it kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link. All right, guys, you like the content that we put out through Elite FTS? If it's the podcast, extra content, it's 20 years of being on YouTube, so there's a lot of different content there. We set up a membership YouTube channel, and with the membership YouTube channel, what you'll get is early release on all the podcasts, so you'll get access to it before everybody else. Those will also all be ad-free, so you won't have any interruptions and can listen straight through. And we'll have exclusive content, such as AMAs, to where we'll take all your questions and then answer them for you guys. So take a moment, join the channel. Is that what it is? Join the channel, join the YouTube. Just hit the join button and help support the podcast, and we'll help you. Back on one.
I wasn't sure what all, but you've pretty much hit on everything. I was like, Dave could talk about this and that, or whatever. So you.
Well, I'm going to piggyback on one of your Instagram posts that I just saw, that like shitty movements or whatever it is, right? So, but I'm going to go a different angle, right? So we're going to go with, we'll go with each body part.
Okay.
Like, what would you consider the shittiest movement for each body part?
That's a good one.
So I'll start.
Ooh, people get mad.
Yeah, I know. That's why I want to do it.
That's why you're doing it.
That's why I'm going to do it.
That's why you're doing it. Just because you want to see people. People are going to watch this and they get, because Dave, at the end of the day, people have emotional attachments to exercises.
Yes, they do.
They do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say something's not great and you give them very logical reasons why this is not a great, they have a mental meltdown. So I'm like, if you're trying to train delts and you're going to do a standing press, why would you stand up and load all of that other stuff? And then they'll start talking about, you know, functional movements and body stabilization. I'm like, that's not what I'm asking. If you want to load your delts with a press, why are you standing? When you can sit down and remove the coordination component, the perception of effort, having to contract your glutes, your lower back, your whole body, just to do a press. Now, if we're just talking about in the context of hypertrophy training, like, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So if we're to stay with the delts, what would be the shittiest exercise they could do for
overhead
the standing overhead press? All right. So I'm gonna jump down so I can remember all these. So we're gonna go from
we're
gonna go from ground up. So we'll go with calves first.
I think with calves, it comes back to, there's a couple of things. It's just how they're doing it. Mm-hmm. So I've managed to kind of crack the code a little bit on that, along with the anecdotes and with the data. That's why when people were like, science sucks, I'm like, science gives us good stuff. We just have to know how to do it in the practical application of things. So the calves, I don't think are as genetic as everybody thinks they are. I think they've just been trained wrong. So the shitty thing that people do for calves is they either do those bouncy reps where they bounce up and down, which isn't doing a damn thing, or they do high reps because they think the calves and the actual gastroc is like 50-50 fast twitch, slow twitch. That's a topic we can do. It's like, like you don't need to change rep range is due to fiber type ratio. But anyway, the soleus is mostly it's like 90+% slow twitch. But the top part of the calf raise, the contraction position, it doesn't do anything. So if you look at its length to tension relationship, it suffers from active insufficiency, which means there's not enough cross bridging that's happening in those short positions. So there's no force being produced. There's no tension being experienced. So once they narrowed this down to keeping the calves in a stretch and just coming back up to kind of a neutral foot position, calf growth for days. And everybody in my group that has changed that, they've seen phenomenal results. So I think with calves, the seated calf raise, you don't need to do it. That's the shittiest. That's the shit. You don't need to do it because if the soleus and the gastroc both do plantar flexion, right? So then when they compared them against each other, that was one of the studies I put up, and they compared them against each other. The seated calf raise, as you might expect, did not really grow the gastroc very much at all. It grew the soleus, but the standing wouldn't grow the soleus almost as much, but the gastroc way more. So just do, in my opinion, the best one to pick. When we weren't doing best, we were doing worse. But did like a toe press on a leg press. Mm-hmm. You don't have to load your back. That's another one. Like if you do, I know I said standing calf raise, but why would you do axial loading for just loading the calves? Mm-hmm. It seems like common sense. But if you're just loading the calves, just use a leg press.
All right, so we'll go to hamstrings.
Probably Nordic. So probably Nordic curls. That's another one. Boy, there's going to be a lot. Dave, why are you doing this? You're going to have everybody pitchforking.
Yeah.
Probably Nordic. So the hamstrings are one of the most easily damaged muscles, and it's an eccentric based. So you're basically just creating massive butt tons of muscle damage with the hamstrings. So they will get those longitudinal adaptations. We know that. We actually have a multitude of studies with the hamstrings on Nordics, but it just creates a butt ton of muscle damage. They're activated really easily. They're mostly faster twitch fibers. They're all the way down on the length tension relationship on the descending limb, which means they're going to be more prone to muscle damage. So they basically meet all of the criteria for what muscle damage is like really easily damaged, what muscle suffers from damage. So you don't want to load those with eccentric overload based exercises, stretch position overload eccentric. So probably Nordics. Like I don't advise anybody to do Nordics.
I think quads.
Like what's the shitty quad exercise that people do? Well, I don't know. Would you define? I think any Zercher squat is like the dumbest exercise anybody can do. We're staying in the context of hypertrophy, right? Because they always get out the pitchforks.
No, I'll say again. So it's like 5 times we said this. We're speaking purely hypertrophy.
Okay, so there's no reason to ever do hypertrophy wise. Wendler had the best. I even put that in my caption. Wendler had the only time Wendler comes up anymore is when I come out and see you. But I love Jim. He's my dude. He had such a great quote about that. He said, "I don't do Zercher squats because I'm not in prison." You think about it. It takes a minute, but that was actually Poliquin thought it was the dumbest exercise ever either. What's a bad one though? Like I think it's tough for quads because essentially, you're loading knee extension. Mm-hmm. Other than like Zerchers, it's just, what's the point of putting an arm in the bend, like the bar and the bend in your arms when you could do a back squat? And I think a front squat's not a great exercise for everybody because not everybody can get their shoulders in that. I could never get my shoulders in that, like that, what's it called, the rack position. Yeah. It just didn't work for me. I could figure it out like this, but I was like, why am I choking myself when I could just put the bar on my back or do a hack squat? So I don't know if we're including Zerchers in that. Outside of Zerchers, I think you could kind of say probably front squats. People love their front squats for whatever reason. And I do still program sometimes for my home gym people just as a change up. But if you're in a gym and you have access to stuff, do a hack squat. You'd even do a heel elevated SSB squat, pretty good for quads. Not bad. But probably fronts and Zerchers are just not great.
All right, so we're at glutes now.
Okay. Like a bad, we're doing all F tier stuff, right? Like That's all the F tier stuff. So F tier stuff, for glutes. What would be an F tier for glutes? So probably, I think those, have you ever seen those, like those cross bench step up things where they step up on the bench and cross over? You know what I'm talking about?
Are you talking about where you use a assisted dip chin machine and just push down on that?
That's pretty bad too.
that's pretty.
You okay?
Yeah,
go with that one. Why would you do that when you can do a leg press, single leg press, right? So
yeah,
I think that one's pretty bad. I don't know why you would do that. That one's pretty. That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So you literally have to hold your body down to do that when you could just lay down on a leg press and do the exact same motion.
All right, so abs.
So you got that one. I don't train abs. So
all right, so abs, low back.
So
the
thing, well, the abs. Okay, you know what we can do? Even though I don't train abs, we could definitely go through. If you're doing, there's no divisions of abs. Like people will be like, there's no upper lower abs. They're on your pelvis and sternum. So really, all you do is like load a crunch type movement. That's really all you can do for abs. I think those bicycle thingies are stupid.
I forgot about all those. Like old high school football shit. God, what was that? Where you had to hold the leg raised for 5 minutes or whatever the fuck it was. Yeah, that was stupid as hell.
Just unnecessary. Ab wheel rollouts. You're training planks. Just all dumb stuff, in my opinion. An ab wheel rollout. In my opinion, you're training a movement. The abs have to do, they get stretched out, but they don't think about it. You don't actually do, the abs main component function is lumbar flexion, right? Or spine flexion. You're not really doing that there.
All right. So we'll take the erectors. We'll skip that because that's kind of just a stabilizer for the lats and all the other kind of stuff. I consider
the erectors what I call like an anti-flexor. So it's like the antagonist of the abs. So if your erectors, what's a bad one? For erectors, I know everybody likes those Jefferson curls, but I think you probably think this too. I've always felt like the erectors got so much work from just every other basic stuff that you're doing. And I think guys also think the erectors are these huge slabs of muscle when they're really just kind of like sheaths that run down the spine. So they'll say, well, what's that on this guy, or what's that on this guy, or whatever. And they're either looking at the tendinous stuff by the lats connecting in there, but the erectors are not like huge muscles. Like if you actually go look, they're those kind of spindly muscles that run all the way down.
Well, I also don't think that people understand just how low the lats actually connect.
They're on the pelvis.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they're on the pelvis.
So it's. I think you're 100% right. A lot of times, what they're seeing isn't what they think that they're seeing.
Totally.
Yeah.
So
we'll move on to lats.
Dumbbell pullovers, not even a lat exercise. So that was going around for a long time. And he really can't do a dumbbell pullover is really a pec and tricep exercise. So, when you go to those upper degrees of humeral elevation, the lats pretty much drop off in terms of having any type of leverage at the shoulder to do shoulder extension. So they don't really do any shoulder extension until you get down to closer to 90 degrees. And if you think about the loading aspect of a dumbbell pullover, it's super heavy in that top position. And then by the time you get over your face, right, you're stacked, your joints are stacked, the load's over top of you, there's no resistance going on. That's where your lats would start taking over. And this has been, I think there's 5 EMG studies that have looked at this, and the lats are just sitting there doing almost nothing. So somebody will be like, well, I feel my lats. I'm like, I didn't say you don't feel them. I'm just saying they're not doing shoulder extension from that position. It's the pecs and triceps. So that's not really a lat exercise. People still think it's a lat exercise.
All right, so we'll go into traps, which is another one that I don't think people understand exactly how far down they actually go.
On the spine. So the lower traps go really far.
Yeah, so traps.
Most people are really mixed up about traps today because they think that bold look that people see, they think it's upper traps. It's the mid traps, and you can see I had somebody the other day try to say, well, why do you say the upper traps are not doing something on the scapula? And I'm like, because they don't have an attachment on the scapula. They attach on the clavicle. So, and then he tried to, at first it was 2 guys and they tried to challenge me. I was like, well, here's the actual like anatomy stuff for the upper traps. The upper traps are relatively small, but the mid traps go out and attach go from the C7 to the acromion, right? And so like all the way out, they're like, well, I see it all the way out to my shoulder. I'm like, to your shoulder. So like out here. So like that's your traps. And it's what you're really, that meaty thick part you're seeing is your mid traps. Probably, well, I mean, really, if you want to get effective, you just have to go the opposite of what you're looking at. If you're getting effective trap training, we're always looking at scapular retraction because all of the divisions of the trap. And somebody said, well, you just said that the upper traps, they pull the clavicle posterior, right? So it's an accommodating motion. So the upper traps pull the clavicle posterior on any type of retraction. So what's a bad one I think that people use? I don't think the vertical shrug is great. I think it's the most common one used. It does train the mid traps, and there's a little bit of upper trap stimulus, but it's a lot of levator. And do you remember this? John Meadows had to stop doing shrugs, vertical shrugs, because they started giving him excruciating headaches. And if you think about like the levator attachment, that makes sense. So I think that's a big reason why. And I wouldn't say it's an F tier, but I would say if you're looking at really effective trap training, you want to get back into rows and like loading scapular retraction.
Well, there's another negative to that would be you're going to use a lot of weight, so it's going to take more time because there's more warm-up sets.
Yeah. So what would you like? You're coming out with, what would you call an F tier trap?
Probably that. Or, yeah, I mean,
I would say even something like a face pull is pretty low because, like, what are you going to load with a face pull?
Well, it's hard to load. You know, I mean, there's reasons for all these things. Like I can see the shrug as just shoulder distraction, you know, just to kind of open the shoulder up. But we're talking a completely different thing now.
Here's the argument I can make for and against. For is probably if you're doing shoulder elevation, there's probably some subdivision in the mid traps that may get activated on that aren't getting as heavily activated on retraction. So it's like okay to include both. It's not a big deal. But I think that the common idea, any of the Olympic lifts.
Yeah.
There we go. It just hit me. Because people will be like, Olympic lifters have huge traps. I'm like, no, they're just lean. Why do people say that? Like they'll be like, was it Riegert? Am I remembering that? Was it Riegert? Yeah. Like it had like huge traps, but they do, if you think about the first part of like a snatch or a pull is like a row from there, right? Yeah. But it's not this stuff, because there's a high velocity. So if the force velocity relationship exists and we're dealing with the velocity curve of the side, there's no mechanical tension there, right? So if like it's a fast motion, you can't have mechanical tension. So I think it's most, especially the Chinese Olympic lifters, they do a lot of bodybuilding stuff. So like the idea that Olympic lifts and vertical pulls are building the traps, especially those, that's probably an F tier. Plus, here's the thing. Here's another reason why that'd be an F tier for traps. Why would you go learn? Like those are hard lifts to learn, snatches, cleans, and all that shit. Why would you go learn to do those when you could just do a row?
Yeah. Yeah. Or a shrug on a fucking, chest supported row. I'm going to go out and learn how to snatch. Yeah. I'm kind of like at the time demands of the whole thing. Like I get on a chest supported row and just,
So if you're training a bodybuilder, think about this. So since we're talking, right, hypertrophy, you would never take a bodybuilder and teach him how to snatch or grow his traps. That's ridiculous. So when people try to make those arguments, they don't try to keep the argument in the context of the discussion because they have an emotional attachment to the exercise. So I'm like, look, dude, if you do Olympic lifting, you got to do the snatch and the clean and jerk. If you're trying to grow your traps as much as possible, you don't need to do those. And that would be, they're not going to serve the purpose.
All right. So we're triceps.
Well, the long head doesn't grow from any pressing. So that's one thing I think that people get mixed up. Your lateral medial head grow well from your pressing stuff. The long head suffers from antagonist inhibition and pressing stuff. And we do have research on that. So anytime you have a two joint muscle, if there's an antagonist motion going on in one joint, it's pretty much going to get shut off. So for triceps, what's an F tier? Again, it comes back. You're just getting pitchforks after me, Dave. Triceps F tier. I think it's more along the lines of, since triceps are only muscle that does elbow extension, we're just constantly looking at elbow extension. I think it's more along the lines of people still think overhead stuff is more long head. when that's not the case. So it's more along the lines of if you're trying to pick, you have to think about triceps training this way. Either you got the long head involved or you kind of don't. So if you're doing a heavy pressing, so if you had an F tier for the long head would be any kind of press. You're not going to get a good stimulus. Here we go. Let's do it this way.
Yeah.
So an F tier for the long head would be any kind of press. You're not really getting anything out of that. I would say borderline F tier would be the overhead extensions. They're still going to grow. Some people have tried to, they've incorrectly kind of came after me and said, I said overhead tricep extensions. I'm just saying they're not more long head. The long head will grow anytime you do a elbow extension where the shoulder is held in a static position. So even if you're overhead, long head will grow. It's just not a long head biased exercise because they say that because of the stretch stuff. So I would say if you're talking long head pressing stuff would be F tier stuff. The medial and lateral head, they pretty much grow similarly regardless of the exercise you're doing. So there's almost not one for those.
All right, then biceps.
Biceps. Well, nobody would think of a reverse curl because they know it's brachioradialis. So an F tier biceps exercise. Any of those preacher curl machines where the resistance profile is ascending, so it gets hard at the top, be really crappy for the biceps. There, you can hack that a couple of ways. So you can just keep it, cut it to the range of motion where you're kind of at that fully extended elbow to only about halfway up. But if you're using one of those, then it'd be like more like an F tier bicep machine would be those preacher curl machines where it's really hard at the top. So those are kind of F tier for biceps. But the hack there is to either cut your range of motion like in half, just use the bottom half, or you can actually lay back on those and it changes the resistance profile because of the trailing arm. So you can kind of hack that a little bit, but if you know that's the kind of machine you're dealing with, you can take it from an F tier to kind of a more like an A tier by using those two hacks. So it's more like the machines in F tier. Yeah,
well, I think we got them all. So what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
They can find me generally by typing in Paul Carter, hypertrophy, or anything related to that kind of stuff. Or I'm still using Lift Run Bang, but it's Lift Run Bang 1. I get asked all the time how I came up with that name, and it was when I started my blog, and at the time I was really doing I was lifting, and that was when me and Windler were talking all the time, and we were doing a lot of conditioning with like hill running and that kind of stuff. So the whole point was just lift, do some conditioning, and the bang people always think has something to do with sexual intercourse, but it really doesn't. It's done that way because most people remember Lift Run Bang because it's easy to remember and it's kind of catchy, but really it's just it's a variable. Because life can't just be about lifting weights and doing conditioning and dieting and all that kind of stuff. So what is your bang? Is your bang, like fabricating trucks, or is it Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or is it home design and interior design? What is your bang in life? And that's the whole point of it, is like to have that stuff, but then have the things that fulfill your life, that give you meaning outside of just like lifting weights and running and doing meal prep and all that kind of stuff. Because you get this one go around, make sure you fill it with other stuff besides, doing all of these things.
I was going to ask you the final thoughts, but I think you just kind of did that.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably, my final thoughts, other than I think the one thing that people should really get out of, despite the fact that I feel like I write these like either intricate posts or do this kind of stuff at a high level, really hypertrophy training is much more simple than they think, and find you good stable exercises that you can progressively overload over time and train really heavy. And I mean, that's going to fix 99% of your problems without you making them more complicated than they got to be.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for coming out again.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure, and we're done.
All right.
All right, guys, thanks for watching the video to the end. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and click here, 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 or here for more videos.